It was raining heavily, almost a downpour. Some people were walking under an umbrella. A food delivery man on a moped covered his face with his hand so that the rain would not interfere with his ride. It was one of the rainy days in the 2022 year. A young guy was sitting at a table with an old man near the store. There were no customers in the store, so the men were playing Zyanki. The young man was clearly winning. Such a game struck the old man to the depths of his soul. He did not expect such a loss at all. The dark-haired guy moved the pieces on the board a couple more times and got a check. Grinning, the guy got up and was ready to leave. The elderly man frowned and began to justify that he almost won. He just lacked 13 moves. The boy waved his hand and told the old man not to run into him. He blushed and pouted, holding Zyanki chips with shaking hands. Then the old man swore, and then told the boy that he was already tired of giving him money. The old man reported that he had just won 20 yen from some Lai and Laojiang this morning, and immediately lost everything to this young man. He was outraged. The guy, at this time, was taking his winnings out of the box, taking out a couple of green bills. He said that he wouldn't have to take money from the old man if these guys wanted to play with him. The guy added that, besides, he receives money, and the old man at this time retains his dignity. He grunted, not believing the boy. He said that what the boy had taught him was complete nonsense. The dark-haired guy sat down at the table again and smiled, asking the old man about how he won then, if everything the boy taught him was complete nonsense. The old man looked at the guy questioningly and said nothing. Then he moved a wooden checker with a red hieroglyph on the board, telling the guy about the rematch. He crossed his legs and let the old man do what he wanted. The guy closed his eyes. His dark hair was blowing in the wind. It was raining without turning. A single leaf from the tree gradually fell to the ground along with large cold raindrops. The boy was sitting with his eyes closed under a yellow awning, his hands folded in a lock. Raindrops were falling around the guy. The moments that took place in the 2022 year gradually turned into photos of memory with the color of sepia. However, the movements in these moments were colored golden. How a man with an umbrella walked past the men, or how an old man moved the pieces on the board. How the guy moved his pieces, and then again the old man's moves. People passing by froze, leaving behind only a translucent golden trail of movement, as someone took the figure of Zyanki in his hands, like a little girl talking to an elderly woman with a package. The movement of the girl's shoes with a butterfly pattern on them. Everything turned into an old film. And the guy, as if inside this dome, sheathed in black and gold film with various moments of his life. The guy picked up a large cassette with such films inside and inserted it somewhere. Everything lit up with a bright golden light. Opening his eyes, the young man sighed. He explained to the thoughtful old man about the essence of the 13 methods of giving up the horse. These techniques consisted in the 6th step of entering the chariot and abandoning the horse, which was a trump card for breaking the line of defense. The young man told the old man that he had seen him playing with an old man in Qingchen Park. It seemed to the guy that the old man from the park played quite skillfully. The boy smiled and said that if an elderly man learns 13 techniques of refusing a horse this week, then it will not be difficult for him to defeat that old man. An elderly man picked up a chip and pointed his finger in the direction of the boy. The man looked at his hand in surprise. The old man chuckled and asked if he could beat that player in a week, then when he could beat the young man. He waved his hand and calmly said that even after 500 years, the old man has no chance of winning this kid. After a while, the old man asked why the guy left school so early on the day of self-study. He looked at the man seriously and said that he was waiting for someone. The old man began to fill up the boy with questions. He asked why the guy didn't go to Zyanki competitions, since he was so good at them. In addition, he said that he was broke, and at the competition he could well win a cash prize. He looked away and said that he just remembered a lot of games and strategies. However, this does not make the boy a professional in Zyanki. A good memory does not give good analytical abilities. The guy didn't see himself as a Zyanki player at all. The old man asked the boy about the good memory. Is he talking about his photographic memory? The old man thought it was a myth. 3 people were walking down the street. The rain dripped for a couple more seconds and ended. The sun came out of the clouds again, illuminating the street with its golden light. The kid told his mother in his baby voice that the rain had stopped. His father, at this time, stroked his small head. The dark-haired boy turned at the voice. The old man looked at him in surprise. The guy stood up. The woman, the mother of that baby, also glanced at the young man. The family stopped and looked at the boy. Rainwater gradually drained into storm sewers. The guy stood with his mouth slightly open. His right hand was shaking so much that he even held it with his left hand. The kid called his mom, surprised and not understanding what was happening. The woman looked wearily at the guy and called out by name Qingchen, and he smiled faintly. Then he turned around and walked in the other direction, trying not to pay attention to the family. The woman approached the old man, calling him Uncle Zhang, and then asked why Qingchen came to play Xianqi with the old man again. The latter, carefully folding the game wooden figures, said that it was not for her to ask him about it, because it was her own son. Grandpa also said that Chen has no living expenses, so he can earn himself some money by playing Xianqi. The woman said that she sends money to his father every month. She also asked if the guy shouldn't be doing self-study that night. The old man yelled and said that it seemed that Qingchen had told him that he was waiting for someone. The woman adamantly decided that she needed to go home and see what was going on there. The woman's husband looked at her wearily and called her by the name of Wanfeng and said that the baby named Heihao had a birthday today. He also reminded her that they had already booked a table and had to take the little boy to the cinema after dinner. The baby grabbed his mother's hand and began to call. Wanfeng became sad and said that she was not up to it right now, since perhaps Qingchen had skipped class. To which her husband told the woman that the guy was already 17 years old, so he could take care of himself, and, in addition, the man asked about his own father. The man asked his wife to wait until the weekend, and then to meet with him. Then he suggested that the woman spend time with the youngest Heihao today. She gritted her teeth, but agreed. A little later, Qingchen returned to his home, opening the front door with a key. Slammed the door, he went inside and closed it. The guy was looking around the apartment, calling someone on the phone. The whole apartment was in empty iron cans and glass beer bottles. There were beeps. The guy kicked off one of the iron cans lying on the floor with his foot. After putting it on the table, he greeted his father on the phone. The one on the other end of the phone immediately informed him that the guy asked his mother for money for maintenance, since his father does not have them, and his mother is now rich. The boy said that he did not need money. Besides, he had not asked his father for it for a long time. A man playing cards with his companions asked his son what he wanted. "Have you been called back to school for a parent-teacher meeting?" The father, holding a cigarette in his hand, immediately told Chen to turn to his mother in this kind of business. The boy hung up, and then sighed heavily, looking out the window. He looked at the phone screen, the clock of which was 6 in the evening and 1 minute. Qingchen rolled up his sleeve and saw on his right forearm a time of 5 hours, 58 minutes and 12 seconds. He tried to erase the bright bluish numbers from his hand with his thumb, but they wouldn't erase. Qingchen sighed heavily again. Throwing on a yellow light jacket with a white hood, the guy thought that it was unknown how this countdown would end. He pulled the door handle, thinking that it could be dangerous. Looking around the room sadly, Chen thought that this could be another life. He slammed the door again loudly and decided to go to the market. He walked for a long time past a hardware store, a pharmacy, and a supermarket. The sky in the city was gradually darkening. The lanterns turned on and illuminated the road in the city. The young man returned home with 2 packages. He looked at the bedside table, on which lay a large plastic first aid kit, a flashlight, and a green pencil case. The guy lay down on the bed in outerwear and put some object under the pillow. Then he got up again and began to change clothes. As he took off his jacket, he thought that when he didn't know what he was going to face, he just had to prepare as much as possible. At night, the guy looked out the window, which was all in iron bars. There was a thunderstorm outside the window, the lightning of which, sparkling, illuminated the dark room where the guy was sitting on the bed. He looked down thoughtfully, his hands folded in a lock. Qingchen was thinking about what he should do now. Should he find help? The guy was shaking all over. Who could he find? Qingchen knew that it was useless to ask ordinary people for help with such a strange question. And the boy didn't have many friends at school either. Taking a green pendant with the image of some deity, the guy bowed to him. Then he lay down on the bed and looked at the bright screen of the phone illuminating his face. The guy sighed. The preparation was completed. Qingchen opened the WeChat app. The first was 2 contacts. His mother is named Wanfeng and some Nan Zhenchen. The young man remembered the tired face of his mother and then his father gambling with his companions. The guy stared sternly at the wall, thinking that his mother had done nothing wrong. In front of Chen's eyes, there was again a black and gold film depicting the past. Gambling, house sale, domestic violence, derailment. All this was done by his father. At that time, there was nothing wrong with his mother's voluntary divorce, as the boy believed. He thought he should be happy for her choice, because it was the right thing to do. The guy recalled his mother's conversation with some woman who believed that a woman could not create a family with a teenage son as ballast, since no one would marry her because of this. The guy remembered how his mother trembled violently listening to this, so he decided to live with his father. He knew that the woman's words were true, albeit very bitter. Qingchen pointed his phone's camera at his hand. The countdown depicted on the forearm was not displayed by the camera. This meant that only the young man saw the countdown. He sighed heavily, putting the hand holding the phone to his face. He chuckled, thinking that this might be his last 2.5 hours of his life. His whole life. And everything is so simple. The end. Qingchen was riding a bicycle at high speed. He was thinking that there were really a lot of regrets in this life, and there were so many things that the guy still didn't dare to do. However, he decided that he didn't need cowardice and fear today. He needed courage. Having slowed down with his foot at some house, the guy looked out the window, in which the light was on. He knew that something was happening here. Qingchen picked up the phone and called a fellow policeman. He said that he wanted to report on the Longton community, indicating the 201st room of the second block, the 17th building. The boy reported that people gathered in this place to gamble. At the other end, the guy was informed that the police were about to arrive. The guy sighed and looked at this window of the 201st room for a few seconds. Then, in the heavy rain, Chen again went somewhere on a bicycle. His face expressed relief and sadness. Raindrops dripped down his face. He gritted his teeth as he quickly drove away from there on his bike along the roadway of the city. After returning home, Qingchen took off his wet clothes. The remnants of rain were dripping down his face. However, the guy was smiling with relief. After changing into a purple bomber jacket, the guy looked at his forearm. There were only 52 minutes and 30 seconds left. After packing his things in a backpack, he wrote something on an envelope and put it on a wooden table. 31 minutes and 49 seconds remained. Qingchen sighed and put the backpack on his shoulder. 1 minute and 14 seconds left. 10. The old man, with whom the guy played during the day, dragged boxes of goods, putting them in the window of his store. 9. The police came to the call, detaining the guy's father and his friends for gambling. 8. 7. Qingchen sat on the bed, waiting. 6. A little girl was looking at the rain through the window. 5. Chen rolled up his sleeves and closed his eyes. On his hand, the time has changed. 23 hours, 23 minutes and 57 seconds. 4. He was waiting for what would happen next. 3. Heihao was sitting in his mother Wanfeng's arms, and his father was stroking his head. 2. They looked out the window at the rain and smiled happily. 1. Qingchen opened his eyes. 0. Time's up. The room became dark, as did the young man himself. Everything took on a bluish bright outline. However, the color was black. The dial on the clock struck exactly 12 o'clock at night. The fly, like Chen himself, were black with a blue outline. Everything sparkled with golden light. The floor under the guy's feet began to crack. Everything began to crack. The guy opened his mouth slightly. He didn't understand what was going on. In front of him was a black and blue chip with the number 10,101, like a binary code. The world began to crack like glass. A bright golden glow moved Qingchen's blue figure in space. He didn't know where he was at all. A bright concentrated sphere of light was reflected in the guy's eyes. He tried to shield himself from the light with his arms crossed. After a while, the young man woke up in a room, also covering his face with his hands. The boy was wearing a blue prison uniform. The room looked like it was from the future, all glowed with green and gold light. Opening his eyes, the excited guy looked around in surprise. Sitting down on the bed with lightning speed, Qingchen looked at his hand. The knife he was holding in his hand was gone. Chen rolled up his sleeve. On his forearm, a bright blue light was written about the countdown to return, which was 47 hours, 59 minutes and 56 seconds. 48 hours. It turns out, 2 whole days. The guy rolled his sleeve back and began to examine his clothes. Then he looked at his hand. The boy realized that he was still in his body, because, after all, fingerprints and the location of pores cannot be faked. However, the guy was confused by his clothes. Was he in another dimension? The guy was thinking that the counter is the time that he will be in another space and time, which means that when the counter ends, the young man will come back. The guy sighed. On his robe was a patch with his prison number 10,101. Qingchen thought that even if not everyone was waiting for him, but still, it was still good that there was a place to return to. Qingchen looked around the room. The turquoise interface began to highlight a variety of signs with descriptions of objects. Among them was a laser lamp, a door and glass in it, as well as a metal wall. Next to the young man's bed, the interface showed what was available. A mug, brown lace-up shoes, and a toothbrush. In the room there was also an iron shelf without doors, on one of which there was a basin for washing and a gray towel. Qingchen touched the metal wall with his palm. He was thinking about what kind of place it was with such expensive building materials. Suddenly everything shook, and the brush fell to the floor. Chen picked it up and looked around, putting on his shoes. Holding a brush in his hands, he leaned against the metal wall near the door so that he could not be seen behind the glass. However, suddenly, the glass door creaked open. Squinting against the bright light, the boy looked ahead. Over the loudspeaker it was reported that it was 7 o'clock in the morning, that is, breakfast time. All prisoners were asked to line up and go to the canteen. Chen gritted his teeth and walked outside of his room. The dining room, apparently, was the center of this prison. There were as many as 5 floors around this middle, in the center of which a bright hologram screen showed a blonde-haired smiling man in a classic suit. The prisoners were marching in formation, taking turns coming out of their cells. Many of them had metal prostheses. Qingchen looked around with interest. The hologram repeated its words that it was already 7 o'clock in the morning and it was time for breakfast. All prisoners were asked to line up and go to the canteen. A stern prisoner with a bionic prosthetic eye walked past Chen, examining him. A red bionic eye was reading the guy's frightened face. Then the man walked by, and Qingchen looked into the distance, thinking about his prosthetic eyes. Did the guy get into a mechanical civilization? A man with a prosthetic arm, on the shoulder of which the number 1 was depicted, greeted the newcomer Chen. Suddenly, his bionic hand was a few centimeters away from the young man's head. He cast a glance at the mechanical arm. The brown-eyed owner of the bionic prosthesis smiled in all 32 teeth. He told Qingchen not to eat too much, otherwise it would be very ugly if the guy threw up here. Then he laughed out loud. Qingchen didn't look at this guy's face. He was more interested in his hand. He frowned, listening to the vile words in his address. Yeah, it's a strange place. A brown-eyed guy with a bionic arm walked past Chen into the dining room. The guys who followed him were giggling loudly. They also discussed what they had heard, that 12 newcomers had arrived here at night. They decided that today it would be possible to have a lot of fun. Then they began to discuss the new Qingchen, who did not have a single mechanical limb. They thought it looked like the guy didn't have any outside connections either. Qingchen looked away and thought, the new guy. Do those prisoners know that the young man is from another dimension at all? He decided that this could not be. Most likely, these guys meant that Chen was just here for the first time. However, he understood that the very having fun did not bode well. A loud cry was heard, expressing fear and horror. Someone was running and shouting, not understanding what kind of place it was. Qingchen looked at one of the balconies where a man was running in the opposite direction, continuing to shout that he wanted to go home and did not want to stay in this strange place at all. The purple-haired guy tripped the alarmist. He began to fall to the floor, shouting that he was Huang Jixian, and his father was the chairman of the Wind Group Corporation from Luo City. The guy warned the other prisoners not to climb. When he fell, the onlookers were laughing. A town called Lo. Where is it? No one knew about him. Qingchen seemed to recognize that screaming guy. He was thinking that wasn't it his acquaintance from the foreign language school of Luo City, who was studying a grade younger than him. The guy realized that, it seems, he is not the first in this place, and obviously not the last. He thought it was possible that the place before the intersection was close to the place after the intersection, but the guy wasn't sure about that yet. A dark blue drone with an orange backlight was flying around the building. The backlight depicted a triangle with an exclamation mark and the inscription warning. Such drones began to appear more and more. The loudspeaker asked to stop, repeating its request over and over again. On a wooden table, near the blackboard and Sayanki figures, a white fluffy cat was sitting and yawning. The loudspeaker asked all prisoners to stand still. The cat's bright blue-green eyes looked at everything around. A huge number of metal robots with claws and a bright yellow lamp were running somewhere. Having surrounded Huang Jixian with their bright lasers, drones and robots were ready to act. At this time, Qingchen was thinking that meeting old acquaintances in a foreign land really gave him a sense of security, even though it depended on the person. He believed that being a fellow countryman did not always help, but could well become a threat. The other prisoners giggled and discussed Jixian. One said that the newcomer was too cowardly. It seemed to him that he might be a fool. Another prisoner said that he had heard that this guy was sentenced to 7 years in prison for non-payment of taxes. He said that the boy did not cry yesterday when he was just brought in, but now everything has changed. The chubby prisoner said that, nowadays, people who contacted tax collectors are either crazy or very stupid. Then he smiled and put his hand on Qingchen's shoulder, asking the newcomer if he was ready. Qingchen, at this time, was looking down sadly. The prisoners were briskly going down to the dining room. Someone was already walking with trays of food, choosing a place for themselves at the table, and someone was choosing books on the shelf for future reading. Qingchen looked around. A figure in a white suit was sitting at one of the tables, and 2 other figures in prison robes were standing next to him. Qingchen noticed that other prisoners were sitting at a distance from those people. He had a feeling that everyone was avoiding this table. The guy was thinking about what, if there could be such a thing at all. A white-haired man in white, at this time, was fingering a piece from the Zyanki game in one hand and stroking a white cat with the other, watching the other tables. This man clearly interested Qingchen. Many prisoners who received trays of food sat and discussed everything. Some prisoner bullied the newcomer, forcing him to work hard. He shouted, which the other prisoners did not like. Only silence emanated from the table, which everyone avoided. Qingchen looked at this table from the balcony, or rather the people next to it. Is that white-haired man the warden of the prison? The guy was doubtful. He believed that he was most likely not the boss, because even though the man was dressed in different clothes, Qingchen still saw his number embroidered on the uniform. He narrowed his eyes, thinking that this gray-haired man was also a prisoner, but still he was somehow different from the others. A blonde-haired boy with an unbuttoned belt noticed Qingchen's gaze. He looked at him with his golden eyes and smiled. Chen continued to stare at him unperturbed, showing no emotion at all. The loudspeaker continued to ask the prisoners to enter the dining room in the order of the queue. The assorted prisoners gradually descended from the upper floors. Someone was walking with a stern expression on his face, and someone was fooling around with his prison friends. Someone was outraged that the queue was too slow today. Some prisoner mentioned some collection, to which another person said that everything would depend on the newcomers. Qingchen shifted his gaze, trying to find the source saying these words. After going down, Qingchen walked and looked around. He concluded that the building consists of 7 floors. 18 drones were near the ceiling, 10 drones had a video surveillance function, and 3 drones had weapons. The guy also concluded that, including him, there were only 3,102 people here. Then the young man heard a loud cry of some prisoner asking others to let him go. Ahead of Qingchen were 2 tall guys with bionic limbs who were holding a short crying guy who was asking them to let go. One of the big guys said not to let that kid go in any case, since he shouldn't get hurt here. Then this guy said they needed to be wary of the warden's attention. Qingchen looked at what was happening around him. An elderly man with a bionic prosthetic eye told Chen to look around, as his turn would come very soon. He smiled wryly as he waited for the food to be put on his tray. Qingchen shifted the stern gaze of his brown eyes to the man and silently stared. He grimaced in surprise and hurried to his desk. After receiving his portion of food, Qingchen followed past the prisoners to choose a table for himself. There was a lively buzz around the guy. Someone did not understand how the local food could be eaten at all. Someone was still shoving in the queue. Qingchen walked by and ignored this hubbub. The red-haired prisoner signaled with a gesture of his hand. The prisoners smiled slyly. Chen walked past them, furtively examining them. Some prison inmates flexed their real limbs with bionic ones. Qingchen waited for a moment and abruptly ran. Prisoners tried to attack him from all sides. One of them, with a bionic arm, almost hooked Chen. However, the guy slipped under him, as if in a dance game called Limbo. Surprisingly, the guy's food remained on the tray. He grabbed a banana with his teeth so that it would not fall and continued to run rapidly. That prisoner shouted to the others to grab the newcomer before the guards found out. Qingchen ran on. At one point, a group of prisoners stopped and tisked. Chen put the banana on the tray and continued to run confidently. The surprised prisoners smiled maliciously. Did this kid Qingchen think he was the smartest? The red-haired prisoner believed that the boy was wrong to think that the gray-haired man would protect him. The prisoners decided to look at what was happening because of the strong interest. Qingchen took the banana in his hand again and kept running. He almost ran to that very table, but someone's hand, with a black watch on it, stopped him. The sweating young man stopped and examined the one who put out his hand. In front of him was the same blonde guy who turned to the new Chen, thinking that he knew what he was counting on. At this time, the gray-haired man put his head on his hand and sat bored. The prisoners came closer and closer, looking with interest at what would happen next. The blonde guy informed Chen that they wouldn't be able to help him. The prisoners began to laugh, telling the newcomer to stop hoping for this plan. The white cat waved his tail. The blonde guy asked Qingchen if he knew who this high-ranking person was. He slyly looked at the guy and said that he was a former member of the king. The prisoners began to move back. Qingchen said that he could handle this party in Zyanki. The prisoners were surprised that they even opened their mouths in shock and stopped laughing disgustingly. The blonde guy frowned and sternly looked at Chen over his shoulder. The gray-haired man moved the black piece on the board, pushing the red one off the board. The elephant retreated from 5 to 7. The man waited for the continuation. A drop of sweat was running down the blonde guy's face. He bulged his golden eyes in shock. Come on, did he really agree? Qingchen closed his eyes, pondering his next move. This position on the board was called capturing the king. In this position, both sides seem to be equal in strength. However, in fact, black has only one step to take in order to win. And the reds, if they are not extremely attentive, will immediately lose. The guy was thinking that, according to the system, he, as a red, should agree to a draw, even if the outcome of the game is obvious. But it is impossible to draw. Qingchen was like a pawn from 2 to 3. The gray-haired man closed his eyes and, after thinking a little, looked like a general from 6 to 1. The back rook went to 4. The elephant went from 7 to 9. The prisoners were so shocked that they almost froze and did not make any sounds. Qingchen gradually took steps towards the white-haired man's desk. The rook went from 1 to 4. General from 4 to 5. A pawn from 4 to 5. The rook is from 3 to 5. The man's face was very stern and stern. Qingchen smiled slightly and raised his eyebrows, verbally moving the pawn from 5 to 1. The blonde prisoner froze in shock. Qingchen sternly looked at the man and informed him that he had made a check. The man also sternly looked at the guy with his burning eyes. He abruptly jumped up from his seat and moved a chip on the board, loudly tapping on it. To himself, the man thought that even though Chen is young, there is not a drop of indecision in him during the game. The man smiled slightly. He said that he was a little interested in Qingchen, since you don't often meet many good Xianqi players these days. The gray-haired man chuckled and said that they would continue playing tomorrow. The cat got up and stretched a lot from lying on the table for a long time. The prisoners were loudly discussing what they had just seen. How could it happen that a high-ranking person lost to this newcomer? It can't be. The prisoners continued to discuss the incident in shock. Did anyone understand anything? These days, it's either a chip for direct enjoyment or a consciousness for logging into a virtual network. Who can have fun like that? The gray-haired man walked past a crowd of prisoners, followed by his entourage and a big cat. The blonde guy smiled and slapped Qingchen on the shoulder, praising the guy for his amazing game. He introduced himself as Lin Xiaoxiaoyi, said that the guy who left with the gray-haired man was called Yi Wang. Saying goodbye until tomorrow, he followed them. Qingchen remained standing in place, not expressing any emotion. The camera behind him was trying to find out information about the boy. Sensing the movement of the camera, the guy turned around and sternly looked into it. There was a crash. The purple-haired guy grabbed Chen. He was crawling on the ground on his bionic prosthetic legs. The guy with tears in his eyes shouted that someone was coming here and asked for help, promising that he would do everything for Qingchen. Chen looked at the guy indifferently, holding the food tray tightly in his hand. The purple-haired man bit his lip in fear. A moment later, someone grabbed his head and pulled him back. A chubby guy with a mechanical leg and a tall guy with a prosthetic arm held this guy with a smile. The purple-haired man tried to escape and mumbled about the fact that his uncle was the director of the Changmin Company in the city at number 17. To which the chubby guy informed him that, with the exception of the Big Five, the rest of the companies are not worth mentioning, let alone this one. Even if this guy's uncle comes here, everything is fair. They dragged the guy back. The same one tried to kick and screamed heart-rendingly, asking for help. Chen remained where he was, expressing only indifference. At this time, Qingchen was thinking that, counting this, 12 new prisoners had arrived today, including Chen, and already as many as 9 people had suffered at the hands of other prisoners. Of these 12, only Qingchen and that suffering youth are earthlings. The guy thought that, apparently, there are very few people who got here. Even if it is 10 million, relative to the total number, a very small proportion got here. Qingchen closed his eyes and thought even harder. He didn't know why, but when he found out about this prisoner, he didn't feel put down at all. On the contrary, Qingchen felt even a little hopeful. On Earth, Qingchen seemed to be superfluous. For his father, he was a burden, and his mother had a new family. Relatives also very rarely came to visit the boy. Qingchen had already lived alone for 2 whole years. Without this countdown, in the future, Chen would be able, relying on his memory, to enroll in a good university far from home, and then leave there forever. The guy rolled up the sleeve of his prison robe and saw that there were 39 hours, 31 minutes and 29 seconds left before returning back to his dimension. However, such a life again has some meaning. After all, this world was very different. For Qingchen, it's like throwing off the shackles, even if there was hope in the guy. But still, life here in prison was radically different. Qingchen, thinking about this, stood in the middle of the dining room and looked at the glowing hologram screen. The guy who appeared behind him was glad that Chen had finally come. He came closer to examine the young man. Smiling, the guy with bionic blue eyes said that Qingchen was really handsome. The rumors are true. An exciting drop of sweat ran down Chen's calm face. Then the young man abruptly walked away from this guy, terribly blushing and embarrassed by such compliments. He smiled and offered to get acquainted, extending his mechanical hand for a handshake. He introduced himself as Lu Guani, who came to this place 3 months ago. He also said that Chen could call him Xiao Lu. Qingchen looked at him strangely and greeted him uncertainly. He thought that from the words of this Lu Guani, it was clear that he knew Chen and, moreover, used polite address. The opponents looked at Chen 21 times in a little over an hour, and these were only those who were in his field of vision. Qingchen looked at this guy and the other prisoners beside him. He decided that these few people around Xiao Lu, apparently, must be under his command. Chen was trying to figure out if this kid had any ulterior motives behind him because of the way he was treating Qingchen. Beads of sweat were running down the boy's face again. He thought that a long tongue would not lead to good. He decided that, for a start, it was worth keeping a distance. Qingchen sternly replied to Xiao Lu that he didn't need this guy's help and he could handle his own affairs quite well. He refused, referring to the fact that he was obliged to serve Qingchen. He firmly replied that no one is nobler than others, so the guy should not use the word serve. Xiao Lu smiled radiantly and said that he meant something else. He said that even if Qingchen was in charge of him in the future, Xiao Lu was even willing to lick the guy's feet. He continued to look at Xiao Lu in embarrassment, asking him what if he had dermatomycosis of the legs. Xiao Lu looked like a German shepherd puppy. He stuck out his dog tongue and happily said that he, in that case, could lick the guy's legs. Terribly embarrassed, Qingchen turned away and began to walk away from Xiao Lu. He decided that it was absolutely impossible to rely on this dubious guy. Lu Guani caught up with the calmly leaving Qingchen and began to tell him that this morning he was thinking why the guy did not go to look for Xiao Lu in the first place. He nudged Chen lightly in the side and smiled, telling him that if Qingchen was hoping to get closer to Lai Shudong's position with the help of the newcomers, then it was very wise. He grinned slightly and looked with his blue prosthetics in front of his eyes. He said that in this prison at number 18, if they manage to get the support of a gray-haired man named Lai Shudong, then their plan will be even more successful. Qingchen thought again. It must be just the same person who played Xianqi and is Lai Shudong. However, the guy did not understand at all what plan Xiao Lu was talking about. Is it really impossible to express yourself more clearly? Lu Guani put his hand to his face and thought out loud. He said that Chen should also beware of Lai Shudong, since an alliance with such a person, in his opinion, seemed to have no chance of success. He thought it could make them addicted. Qingchen folded his hands in front of him and gritted his teeth. He, all this time, was thinking only about self-preservation. A few seconds later, Xiao Lu apologized for talking a lot and asked Chen what instructions he had this time. He scratched his chin, thinking. Qingchen reported that there is a llama in the south, not an animal, but a Buddhist teacher. Lu Guani looked at him in surprise. At this time, Lai Shudong was sitting in his office and looking at a tablet. The blonde-haired Lin Xiaoxiao was sitting next to him, and the stern Yi Wang was standing behind Lai Shudong. Lin Xiaoxiao was sitting on a chair with his shoes off and turning the handle in different directions. Then he smiled and called his boss, telling him that the newcomer Qingchen did not help the rest of the newcomers. Lai Shudong shifted his gaze to Xiaoxiao and reported that Qingchen was becoming very determined when playing Xianqi. Even without hands, he was striving to preserve life, not to mention others. Xiaoxiao sighed, but then cheerfully reported that Xianqi is Xianqi on the board and Xiaoxiao can be decisive. He then asked his boss if he would continue chasing Qingchen tomorrow to play Xianqi. He responded positively, saying that if not with Chen, then he has no one to play with, since Xiaoxiao and Yi Wang, according to Lai Shudong, are very bad players. Yi Wang came closer and stretched out his hand to the tablet in his boss' hands. Then he looked at the dark-haired guy and said that the Kai Corporation had reported the capture of some Huchen. The procedure for bringing to justice has already been completed. Lai Shudong pointed his finger at the image of a bald man named Guo Huchen. He also said that this Guo Huchen should be transferred to prison number 18 in the coming days. When he arrives, Yuan should get in touch with him. To which the guy said that he had already crossed paths with this Guo Huchen before, although it was very difficult to get along with this person, but he can at least communicate. Lai Shudong closed his eyes, thinking about what he had said. Yuang asked Lin Xiaoxiao if he had seen today's incident with that injured youth. He reported that he had been watching for a very long time and constantly felt something abnormal. He said that, at first glance, the kid was talking nonsense after the breakdown. However, this young man spoke about the city of Lachen and the Win Group Corporation very confidently, as if about a real fact. Xiaoxiao reported that the identity was also verified. From the outside, this young man is also an ordinary idle man who dropped out of high school. then organized a trade in mechanical prostheses following the Black Tiger in the city at number 18. Xiao scratched his nose and said that the guy was suspected of illegally robbing mechanical prostheses. However, there was no evidence. In the end, using tax evasion, he was sent to prison 18. Xiao also added that, having found out the entire life path of this young man, Lin Xiao had not heard anything about Lochen and the Win Group Corporation. Lai Shutun told the blonde guy to keep watching, as this young man had other problems. Then he was silent for a second. He was interested in the situation of the person with whom Lai Shutun was playing Xianqi in the past of this incident. Lin Xiao looked at his boss excitedly and said that he had not yet had time to find out information about who Mr. Lai Shutun was playing with. However, the prisoner promised that he would be able to give an answer by the end of the year. The guy was thinking to himself that his boss was so interested in that kid playing Xianqi. Then he noticed Qingchen walking by. Is he here too? Qingchen was walking towards the electronic library. Going to the shelves with tablets, he picked up one of those that stood in large piles on the shelves. Turning on his screen, the guy saw a blue interface with an authorization sign. Authorization requested an IP address and password. The blonde-haired Xiao came up from behind. Smiling broadly, he said that the first time he got into prison, he thought it was a reader for assigning a number to a prisoner. The guy also said that after authorization, this tablet will display Qingchen's latest actions, its bookmarks, set reading settings, and even font size. It also had a built-in artificial intelligence of speech, which a guy can call by his name, and artificial intelligence will help the young man find the necessary information. Qingchen pressed the registration button. Then he asked Lin Xiao if it was possible to watch the news on this tablet. He said that the guy might not even try, since his account does not have enough rights, just like Xiao. However, their boss named Lai Shutun had enough rights to view the news. Qingchen concluded that, apparently, in this place, Lai Shutun is really freer than ordinary prisoners. Chen thanked Xiao and started to leave. He followed and told the young man not to hurry, noticing the guy sitting at the table. Lin Xiao froze and stopped. He turned back in shock and began to run his hand over Qingchen's face, which began to merge with the bright blue chips. What's going on anyway? Li Shutun looked thoughtfully at his tablet. Lin Xiao tried to convince his boss that this kid, Qingchen, couldn't do anything. According to Xiao, Chen just wants to get closer and get a chance to get along with Lai Shutun. The blonde man gently pointed his finger at the dark-haired guy at the other end of the table. The young man was also sitting and looking at some blue hieroglyphs on his tablet. An excited Xiao reported that he had just noticed that this boy Qingchen was absent-mindedly looking at the tablet reader. At that time, he was looking into his reader and very quickly flipped through the pages, moving his finger across the screen with lightning speed. Xiao believed that the young man was just randomly swiping his finger across the screen. Lai Shutun cast a stern look at Lin Xiao. Then he turned back to his reader, telling Xiao that he should not meddle in his own affairs, and also he should not neglect the desire of other people to save their lives. He lowered the slightly sad look of his red eyes down and said that if Xiao and Chen switched places, then, as Shutun feared, Lin Xiao would be even more impatient. Lai Shutun told the blonde guy to learn how to put himself in the other's place. 3 hours later, someone sighed loudly enough. A big white cat with gray stripes. Lai Shutun himself and his entourage Lin Xiao and Yi Wang walked past Qingchen, who was still looking into the reader, lightning fast poking at the screen with his finger. At one point, Lai Shutun and his gorgeous cat stopped for a second. He asked Qingchen what was on the previous page in the third line. Qingchen, without looking up from the reader, said that it was written there that when order turns into chaos, chaos should be used to maintain order and preserve the law. Yi Wang and Lin Xiao stared at the guy in shock, the latter even covered with beads of sweat. Lin Xiao opened his mouth slightly, thinking that Qingchen had answered too quickly. It seemed to him that the guy said the phrase at random. Yi Wang approached the young man and asked to borrow his reader for a moment. Chen handed it over, but asked to return it as soon as possible. The dark-haired tall guy opened the previous page and checked the third line. Greatly surprised, Yi Wang reported that Qingchen had said everything correctly. Xiao, at this time, was screaming, not understanding how such a thing could happen at all. Qingchen shifted his gaze to Lai Shutung's cat. A handsome white man with gray stripes was also looking at him. The cat's eyes shone brightly with gold, shimmering in green shades. Hearing Yi Wang's words, Lai Shutun chuckled. Stretching his lips in a smile, he said that the young man interested him even more. Then he told his entourage that it was time to go for a snack. Qingchen stared into the distance at the departing figures. He thought that discovering his abilities, though risky, was the best way. In the end, if you really wanted to survive in this bestial prison, then you need to prove to the freest person here that it is you who will be useful to him. Lai Shutun died, as usual, with Wang standing next to him and the cat sitting on the table. Lin Xiaoxiao walked over to his desk and sat down opposite Lai Shutong after taking off his brown shoes from his feet. He smiled in all 32 teeth and said that he was back. The tense Wang clenched his fist and told him to show the guy respect in front of the boss. He pouted and said that the boss has nothing against it, so Mommy should also be at least a little more lenient. Lai Shutun interrupted them and smiled slightly, asking if there were any results. Lin Xiaoxiao smiled broadly again and said that this Xianqi player, Qingchen, is absolutely clean. Too clean. There were no abnormal leads, but because of one Xiaoxiao became curious. He said that the boy's data showed that he was a student of the city's high school at number 18, and his parents had died in a car accident. The boy received an inheritance, he had no criminal record, and there are also no relatives. In the case of the boy, it was said that he stole a phone, which was enough for punishment. Xiaoxiao reminded his boss Lai Shutong that he knows perfectly well that more than half of the prisoners of the 18th prison have committed serious crimes. Usually in this prison there are people with a criminal record, or people caught by the tax authorities. This kid is the only thief who should never have been in such a place. Lin Xiaoxiao also said that the young man's sentence is only 6 months. Perhaps it was the shortest sentence in the history of the 18th prison. Lin Xiaoxiao waved his hand and asked his boss if this raised any more questions. In addition, the guy said that he asked for information from someone outside. There were contradictions in the boy's case, as they say. He stated that he bought the phone himself and paid money for it. Only the phone seller did not know why there was no crediting to his account. The cameras suddenly broke down, and it's impossible to justify it. Therefore, if the seller of the phones acts as a witness and refuses to give evidence earlier, or the video from the surveillance cameras with the moment of payment appears, the boy will be released. Xiaoxiao noticed that this was a well-known trick. In most cases, all the businessmen who came to prison had such a strategy. Then the guy said that the case was taking an interesting turn because of the guy's last name. Lai Shutun tensed, listening attentively to the guy. Lin Xiaoxiao reported that the surname of that dark-haired boy was King. The King surname was very special nowadays. 5 large companies monopolized almost all key aspects of the economy, and one of them was the King Corporation. In addition, the surname King was very rare, so if there is an opportunity to meet a person with the surname King, deep down you will know that this person belongs to the King Corporation. Lin Xiaoxiao also reminded his boss Lai Shutong that the King Corporation had previously planned to send Lu Guanyi to the 18th prison. The guy said that this kind of thing is easy enough to track. At that time, he simply did not understand why the corporation sent such a small person. What did they want to do? Wang reported that he remembered this Lu Guanyi, who was gathering people all the time. Xiaoxiao waved his hand, pointing at the guy, and replied approvingly. The contented cat, at this time, itched and licked himself. Lin Xiaoxiao cast a sly glance as he continued to tell Lu Guanyi about it, who, as soon as he got into this 18th prison, immediately began to suppress the prisoners using his excellent mechanical processes. Suddenly, in a month, his confrontation with 2 factions turned into a situation with 3 strong players. It was then that Lin Xiaoxiao became interested in the fact that it was not the King Lai Corporation that sent Lu Guanyi to prison number 18. To which Wang expressed his opinion that the corporation knew perfectly well that boss Lai Shutun was here, so they wanted too much. The boss, meanwhile, calmly sipped his drink, listening to the thoughts of his subordinate guys. Lin Xiaoxiao reported that, based on this, he was still wondering if the King Corporation had gone crazy, unexpectedly sending a little booger to the 18th prison to do something. Xiaoxiao reported that only today he realized that Lu Guanyi had been looking for a way for this guy named Qingchen all this time. Xiaoxiao leaned closer to the table and said that no matter what the King Corporation wanted to do, Qingchen would still be the most important, and Lu Guanyi was nothing more than an errand boy. He thought about it and scratched his chin with his hand. He wondered what they, in the King Corporation, were planning to do here in the 18th prison. If this Qingchen is really valuable to the King Corporation, then what is he doing here? Lai Shutong put the bowl on the table and finally spoke up. King Corporation. He thought it might be time to choose the next generation of shadows. Wang gritted his teeth in horror and looked at his boss. An exciting drop of sweat was running down Lin Xiao's face. He began to ask the boss about the next generation of shadows. He wondered if Qingchen was one of the candidates. So this guy came here with a mission. Lai Shutun replied firmly that such a huge consortium should have both an official and a hidden power. Although his face was calm, but still, the excitement was betrayed by small wrinkles and a cold expression on his face. The head of the King family is an official, and the Shadow was a hidden force. Shadow specialized in dirty work and had great authority. He was the master of the King Corporation's underworld. No one could control the Shadow except the head of the family himself. However, only each shadow selection process was unusually cruel, like feeding poisonous nasty creatures. Lai Shutun reported that it looked like the King Corporation was going to disturb everyone's peace again. Some guy, behind them, began to walk very slowly and look around. Apparently, he was trying to eavesdrop on what the boss and his entourage were talking about. Wang, sensing this, looked around, instilling terrible fear in the guy. The latter, meeting his eyes, immediately began to wave away and hurried away from there. Lin Xiao went on to say that even if this Qingchen was a candidate for the position of Shadow, there was still no need to make his biography as clean as if there was no connection with the King Corporation, unless there was a secret more important hidden in Qingchen's biography. The cat stretched out and lay down next to the boss's hands. He immediately began to gently stroke the animal. Lai Shutun reported that after what Lin Xiao said, he suddenly felt that Qingchen was like one person. He also said that his guys, who were his subordinates, had not seen this man. However, they themselves would soon see everything and understand what their esteemed boss was talking about. Lai Shutun then reported that he was very interested in a person like Qingchen, and then told Lin Xiao to go and try to find out his data. Xiao excitedly started asking about why his boss is so optimistic about Qingchen, because he is a man from the King Corporation. He calmly replied that he just asked the blonde guy to test him, and he didn't want to do anything. Besides, isn't it interesting to grab someone from the King Corporation? Lai Shutun grinned slyly. Lin Xiao lowered his gaze and said that he felt that this guy named Qingchen was different from them. To which his boss replied that in every organization there are such people as a tiger pacifying mountains, a shrewd hawk, a warlike wolf, an agile leopard, and a loyal dog. Everyone also had their own responsibilities. Hearing this, Xiao chuckled and asked his boss about which of the roles belongs to Xiao in the organization. To which Lai Shutun and Wang replied in unison that Lin Xiao was more like a fish shirking from work or feces poked with a wooden stick. The guy was in shock. A very loud scream was heard. Lin Xiao turned towards the source of the sound. The guy with the patch near his eyebrow fell to the ground and screamed loudly. An electric current permeated his body. A huge robot guard with a taser arm asked him and another guy lying on the floor with foam at his mouth to go to their place according to the location of their camera. The guy with the band-aid told the robot that he had been there once in the morning. How can he remember the location of this place? The lunching prisoners laughed while discussing how interesting it was to look at the newcomers who were electrocuted by a robotic guard due to the fact that they did not remember their place and the location of their cell. Then they turned the topic to a newcomer named Qingchen, who was playing Xianqi in the morning. They noticed that after the morning mess, the guy suddenly remembered his place. They didn't understand if the guy was definitely human. At this time, the newcomers continued to be electrocuted. Someone abruptly grabbed Qingchen's shoulder with his hand. He opened his mouth in shock. Then he turned around and saw Lin Xiao, who was leading him to the side with lightning speed, continuing to hold his shoulder tightly. He smiled radiantly and said that in the future, Qingchen would not need to stand in the same queue with these prisoners. He also reported that Qingchen is the person playing with boss Lai Shutun in Xianqi. Now there was no question of waiting in line. Qingchen glanced back at the metal guard who was unconcerned about what was happening. He realized that the robot guard did not react at all to all these actions on the part of Xiao. He was interested in how special the situation of these three people was that even the robots responsible for discipline in prison did not react to them. Lin Xiao gently poked some guy on his bionic prosthesis. The stern man turned around with a creepy look, but when he saw a blonde guy in front of him, he faded away. He waved his hand at him and a huge bully let them go ahead, without a queue. Xiao passed by rather bored, even yawning. Qingchen was surprised by what was happening. There were also other prisoners in real shock. How come Qingchen suddenly started eating with Lai Shutun? Lin Xiao smiled and told Qingchen that he shouldn't be so surprised by what was happening, since a person who plays Xianqi with the boss should certainly be and will be treated in a special way. The guy also said that he understands that the food in this prison is insanely not tasty, but still, the boy should hurry up and eat normally. Listening to this, Qingchen looked at Lai Shudong carefully. He ate calmly and did not pay any attention to it. The young man decided to follow his example, and a passing Lu Guanyi smiled and gave Qingchen a thumbs up. Late in the evening, at 8 o'clock and 40 minutes, a request was sent over the loudspeaker to the prisoners to return to their cells in order. The prisoners had already lined up and were gradually climbing up, while the robot guards controlled them. Slowly, Qingchen reached his cell and began to wash his face. While he was doing all the toilet procedures, he thought that Lai Shutton just wanted to play Xianqi with the boy. Chen didn't understand how it happened that just one morning changed the attitude towards him so much. Is it because of the authority of a young man in this world? Qingchen contemplated his reflection in the mirror thoughtfully. The tap water dripped slowly into the sink. Drop by drop, Qingchen woke up in a cold sweat. Opening his eyes, he found himself by the fireplace of some medieval building that looked like a castle, at least from the inside. There was a ticking sound behind him. The young man stood up and looked around in the semi-darkness. Behind him lay a brown bear toy, ripped open with a bloody knife. The guy looked at the toy with horror, even opening his mouth slightly. On the wall, next to a bear toy and a knife, hieroglyphs were written in blood, which read the word ghosts. Qingchen walked through this mysterious house and looked at everything around. Everywhere there were hieroglyphs on the walls of scarlet color. Mutilated toys were lying around. The young man thought that his body, at the moment, should still be in the cell. So Qingchen was in a dream right now. While the guy was walking around the tortured toy, the knife reflected the boy sleeping, at the moment, in his cell. Hearing the knock, the guy bulged his eyes in horror and approached the door, asking about who was behind it. The man behind the door replied that he was from the police. He gave his police number 27,149. Then he asked if the guy had called the police and asked to open the front door. Qingchen covered his face with his hand, burning through the door with his bright eyes. He thought that the voice outside the door seemed very familiar to the young man, but he could not remember why at all. This confused the guy. Did he have problems with his memory? The young man looked at the door handle and then opened the front door with a bang. In front of him was a man in a police uniform. Bright lightning through the storm illuminated his face. It was Lin Xiao. The guy sternly examined the policeman. Hearing a crash from the house, he turned around. Then policeman Xiao went forward into the house and told the applicant Qingchen to stand still. Then he told him to lock the door and not move. The policeman began to slowly climb the steps, and the frightened Chen, at this time, closed the front door with lightning speed. Then he heard the knocking again. The guy asked who was there. He was informed that there was a policeman with the police number 27,149 outside the door. Then he asked the young man if he had called the police and politely asked to open the door for him. Qingchen stared at the door in surprise. Number 27,149. Isn't he already upstairs? Then who is behind the door? They greeted her again and asked her to open the door. Chen asked again who was there. The excited Qingchen pondered. The voices around him were asking who the real officer was then. The one who went upstairs, or the one outside, or maybe neither one nor the other. Voices whispered to the guy, trying to confuse him. They asked him what the guy's choice would be. He clenched his jaw and squeezed his eyes shut for a second. Then he ran like lightning and almost grabbed the knife that was stuck in the plush brown bear. When the young man tried to grab the knife, a sphere lit up brightly near him, which prevented the boy from taking hold of the black handle of the knife. He realized that someone was deliberately preventing the young man from taking a knife. Sweat was pouring down the guy's face. He was reaching for the knife again, thinking that someone wanted to sharpen him here forever. Voices began to shout loudly, pressing on the guy. They asked him why the boy needed a knife, because he should have opened the door to the second policeman first. Qingchen noticed that the meter on his hand was still running. The clock was not visible, but the number of minutes was 3 and the seconds were 12. The guy's heart was beating hard and his blood was still boiling. Qingchen decided that he had no other choice. He tensed and clenched his teeth, shouting for the bright glowing dome to break. The guy tried to grab a knife. With a bang, he did it. The sphere shattered into many pieces. Qingchen took the knife in his hand and gripped its handle tightly. Open the door. The young man decided to open the door, and only after he killed that policeman upstairs. Bright red interface signs with a question mark appeared one by one around the guy. He discovered that when this barrier broke, the dark-haired boy's memory returned again. Qingchen also realized that that policeman upstairs was the blonde-haired Lin Xiao. The realization came to him that he must have been in a nightmare created by Lin Xiaoxiao himself. At this time, Xiaoxiao was thinking that he, by the way, tested this Qingchen in this way only at the request of the boss. It is for this reason alone that the blonde guy created this unpleasant nightmare called the double poltergeist dilemma to test the courage and resilience of this young boy. Lin Xiaoxiao could not have imagined that this smart boy would go through all this horror with such calmness and confidence. According to Lin Xiaoxiao, Qingchen wasn't the least bit scared. He even had the courage to fight against any resistance of this terrible nightmare. At this time, Qingchen was slowly climbing up with a knife in his hands. Xiaoxiao, after all, had himself observed the brave deeds of this boy. He was so calm and collected, even though this young man was only 17 years old. Lin Xiaoxiao was completely at a loss how he managed to get that knife in his hands, even when Xiaoxiao clearly tried to stop him. Qingchen even broke the nightmare barrier, and it's all in Lin Xiaoxiao's territory. Walking up to the blonde-haired man, Qingchen sternly called his name. He looked surprised, but then began to descend down the steps of the ancient staircase, scratching his head. It seemed strange to him that Qingchen could remain conscious while being in this terrible nightmare. Xiaoxiao noticed that boss Lai Shuten was right about this kid. He was really good at something. The dark-haired guy frowned at the bridge of his nose and tightened his grip on the knife handle. He looked sternly at Xiaoxiao and asked him why he was doing this, since Qingchen could not remember at all that he had climbed to him and the others. Lin Xiaoxiao sat down on the steps and took off his police cap. Then he closed his eyes and said that he needed to know what Qingchen was like, since his boss Lai Shutong had such a high opinion of this young guy. Then he concluded that this nightmare had become useless. Qingchen turned his head to the other side and asked Xiaoxiao about what his superpower meant. He agreed with the guy's conclusion and said that this power is the same as Qingchen's photographic memory. Xiaoxiao reported that he has his strength and ability, so there is nothing to hide. Qingchen thought deeply. A world where mechanics and mysticism coexist. Perhaps the reason for the imprisonment of Lai Shuten and the other guys was directly related to the power they possessed. Then the blonde guy calmly asked Chen if he was from the King Corporation or not. The boy thought about it. King Corporation? What is it about? Then he turned around and looked at Xiaoxiao with slight contempt, asking him if such an attitude towards the boy was due to suspicions about his identity. Then Chen ordered, to begin with, to explain to Xiaoxiao why the robo-guards ignored him. He cast a bored glance of his golden brown eyes and said that it was all because the guards had no right to touch them. But still, Qingchen should not have avoided Xiaoxiao's question. He then reported that he had found a CCTV recording of Qingchen talking to Lu Guanyi. The blonde guy also said that Lu Guanyi was placed in this prison at number 18 by the King Corporation. And now, this guy Lu Guanyi is willing to give anything to contact Qingchen. So Lin Xiaoxiao was almost sure that the dark-haired youth was from the King Corporation. The stern young man sat down on a green armchair and looked at the prisoner. Then if he was so sure that Chen was from the King Corporation, then what was the point of interrogating him at all? Privately, at this time, Chen was thinking that, even after confirming his identity, if they wanted to contact the guy, then he had something else that these guys really wanted. Lin Xiaoxiao calmly reported that his organization does not deal with a person's past. As long as he is reliable, he can join. The guy grinned and said that, of course, it would be necessary to meet the standards. To which Qingchen replied seriously, but calmly, that if they had checked him, then the young man was already suitable for them. He slightly looked away and said that he personally thought that Qingchen was not suitable for them at all. He honestly admitted that it seemed to him that the two of them wanted completely different things. But, as the boss named Li Shuten said, there must be, without fail, diversity in the grouping. A shrewd hawk, a tiger pacifying mountains, a warlike wolf. Everyone had a use. Lin Xiaoxiao got up from the steps and smiled, telling the guy that he could already guess Xiaoxiao's role in this organization himself. Qingchen looked at Xiaoxiao thoughtfully. Then he asked if he was the donkey of the group. Xiaoxiao opened his mouth in horror. Then, he suddenly placed his hand on the back of the chair, right next to Chen's face. Smiling slyly, Xiaoxiao leaned closer to the guy and said that the King Corporation sent Lu Guanyi to this prison first to prepare everything, and then send Qingchen as well. He began to interrogate the boy about what he wanted to do, or rather, what he wanted to find here. Qingchen sternly looked at the blonde guy and said that it was a question he should have asked Lu Guanyi. In his mind, the guy was thinking that he should ask Lu Guanyi as soon as possible to find out what was going on at all. Lin Xiaoxiao, hearing the guy's words, looked at him tiredly and sternly. He was clearly angry and dissatisfied. Suddenly everything looked like a broken TV. Qingchen opened his eyes wide in shock, looking at the overbearing Xiaoxiao, who told him that, no matter if he kept silent, Xiaoxiao would deal with it sooner or later. Qingchen's eyes closed. Through the green rays in the dark, the young man heard Xiaoxiao's words that the boy should rest, because in the morning he had to play Xianqi with boss Lai Shutong. Drops of water falling from a loosely closed faucet were heard again. The sink was already partially filled with water. Qingchen opened his eyes slightly, seeing the metal ceiling of his cell in front of him. He was lying in a cold sweat, putting the outside of his hand on his forehead. The boy rolled back his sleeve and looked at the time on his forearm, which was 20 hours, 59 minutes and 20 seconds. The next day, in the main hall, the thoughtful Yuang and the attentive Lai Shutong listened to Lin Xiaoxiao's indignation. He was furiously telling his boss that he had tested Qingchen with the double poltergeist dilemma last night. However, Chen picked up a knife and went to manually kill one of those two policemen. The blonde guy, terribly angry and loudly tapping his index finger on the table, tried to assure his boss that this boy named Qingchen is a real evil. Yuang immediately noticed and said that Lin Xiaoxiao should slow down with the double poltergeist dilemma, since a simple person could simply not stand it. To which he replied that Van should not worry, since the guy did not overdo it with this nightmare. Then he reported that this child had managed to get out of his nightmare trap. Lai Shutong gave his voice, saying that it would be very difficult for an ordinary person to escape from Xiaoxiao's nightmare trap. Probably, this boy had a very strong will. Sweating profusely, Lin Xiaoxiao scratched his head and lowered his gaze, telling his boss that he should think twice about this situation, since this child was a real evil and he was not like them at all. Lai Shutong moved the red wooden figure on the Xianqi board. He sternly informed them that they had already lost so many of their own that even boss Lai Shutong and Yuang and Lin Xiaoxiao were stuck in this prison. He said that Xiaoxiao needs to understand that it is not always possible to defeat darkness with light. He cast a glance of his golden eyes at Lin Xiaoxiao, saying that sometimes you need to resort to fire. A melodious voice began to permeate the walls of the prison. While putting on his shoes, Qingchen heard familiar motifs and words. The guy turned around at the sound and stared into the distance in shock. He didn't know why there was this song called Goodbye here in this prison. Is this the future of the earth? Qingchen was walking somewhere past the robo-guards, who once again electrocuted the disobedient newcomers. Slowly, the young man came across Lai Shutton's desk and sternly examined everyone around. Shutton did not express emotions at all, just stroked his white-striped cat. Lin Xiaoxiao turned his head towards the guy and looked at him with a dissatisfied face. After wishing the boy good morning, Xiaoxiao smiled slightly. Then he crossed his legs and asked the stern Qingchen if he had slept well. Qingchen sternly and harshly continued to stare at the blonde-haired man. To himself, the young man thought about how he could have slept at all. How, I wonder, does this Lin Xiaoxiao imagine himself at all? Qingchen had been trapped by that dream demon for more than 2 hours. Lai Shutong then spoke, thereby attracting Chen's attention. Lin Xiaoxiao immediately gave up his seat to Qingchen while he listened attentively to the words of the white-haired man. He said that most of the people who came out of the trap of the dream demon felt very depressed. However, Qingchen, in his opinion, was special. The guy not only broke out of Xiaoxiao's control and grabbed the dagger, but also the guy and stood on his feet confidently today. This surprised and delighted Li Shutong. Qingchen immediately, without ceremony, asked the gray-haired man about whether the boy could get abilities like Lin Xiaoxiao. He chuckled and said that the young man, after all, could not go the way of the blonde guy. The cat looked at the boy with his bright turquoise eyes. Lai Shutong slyly looked at the guy and said that, on the contrary, his path would be more suitable for him. Yuang opened his mouth in shock. Lin Xiaoxiao opened his mouth wide in horror and lowered his hands down in shock. Is Shutton's way? Xiaoxiao wondered what kind of person was standing in front of him. What influence did Qingchen have in this world? Xiaoxiao was completely incomprehensible about what was happening. However, he couldn't even ask about it directly, as it could very well be that Lin Xiaoxiao's identity would be revealed. Qingchen sternly looked at Lai Shutong and asked him how he could follow his path. The man waved his hand and told him not to misunderstand him. Yuang and Lin Xiaoxiao were unable to follow Lai Shutong's path just because they met a white-haired man a little late. He also informed Chen that although the man admired the boy's talents, however, it was clearly not enough. He nodded and said he understood. Suddenly, translating the topic, Lai Shutong suggested that the boy play Xianqi, to which he said that the most important thing in the game is precisely a meeting with a worthy opponent. And if the fool wins by using his position, then this game will simply be meaningless. One of the prisoners started asking Chen about his bad mood and offered to rest for at least a day. Another prisoner called him, reproaching him for having fun again. Lu Guani, at this time, was eating and examining Qingchen. The dark-haired guy abruptly stood up and said that there was no need for rest. Lai Shudong was surprised, but tried to shift his attention to the Xianqi board, on which the pieces were laid out in the endgame of the Imperial Court. This was the final part of the game. Qingchen sternly looked at Lai Shudong and began to voice his moves. The rook on the deuce will move horizontally by 5. Lin Xiaoxiao rolled his eyes. The rook on the 5 will move to 7. The cannon on the deuce will move horizontally by 8. The prisoners were in shock. The rook on the 5 will move horizontally by 6. The pawn on the 4 will move to 1. Check. Lai Shudong frowned and thought about the fact that Qingchen used a rook to involve a male general in the game, and the pawn, having moved one step forward, formed a solid network. Indeed, it is impossible for an ordinary person to guess about such an elegant reception. The gray-haired man held up a chip with black hieroglyphs and grinned, moving it to another place. While he was doing this, the man reported that he was still thinking that the boy still needed some rest. But it seems that he was very wrong. The prisoners crowded around them. Everyone was watching the game as if at a sports match. Many even went up to the balconies to see better. Qingchen turned the general upside down again. Is it really true? Qingchen won again. How is this even possible? The prisoners were in shock. Lin Xiaoxiao leaned forward and surreptitiously examined the boy's calm face. The chatter didn't stop. Some even began to support Qingchen, considering his next win even too courageous. It doesn't matter how, but if someone once beats someone like Li Shuten, it will be expensive. Lu Guani smiled broadly and said that he would also like to learn how to play Xianqi. His subordinates looked at the guy strangely, thinking that he was talking complete nonsense. When Qingchen turned around, the crowd of prisoners gradually began to disperse. The young man asked the gray-haired man if he could ask a question. He chuckled and said that it could be considered that this would be a reward for the victory, so the boy could well ask the man any question. He immediately asked if Li Shuten had just played the accordion. Yi Wang was clearly surprised by such a question. Lin Xiaoxiao became even more dissatisfied than before. The guy wondered to himself why he thought so much about the question in order to take advantage of the situation. But at the same time, he asked about the song. Lai Shuten closed his eyes and, stroking his cat, agreed with this, asking the boy about what happened. Was this the first time the young man had heard such a thing? Then Li Shuten said that it was the music that was composed by the founder of their organization. He also wrote the lyrics of this song. Slightly flustered by the answer, Qingchen wondered what, then, if their founder is from Earth. In addition, this founder seems to have rather brazenly appropriated someone else's merits. The dark-haired young man was interested in how long Shuten and others had founded this organization. He was also interested in when this immigrant ancestor appeared here. A drop of sweat trickled down Chen's face. He grunted nervously and said that the song was very beautiful. Then the guy asked Li Shuten to sing it to him in full. Although he was surprised, he tried not to show it. He looked at the boy strangely and said that he could sing to him. However, the text would not be complete, since many years had passed and therefore much had been lost. Then, in a beautiful velvety voice, the man began to sing about the path running along the old road and about the green grass and the blue sky, about swaying willows and the melancholic melody of an old flute, about the sun illuminating the fields, about parting with many troubles. After finishing the song, Li Shuten focused on the last line of the song about parting with troubles. He said that this line was added by later generations, and they say that initially it was not. He believed that, only, no matter how close it was, it seemed as if this line was a little lacking in meaning. Qingchen thought while scratching his chin. Then he straightened up and asked the gray-haired man how about changing it to best friends have gone on different sides. Lai Shuten's golden eyes bulged in shock. The phrase best friends have gone on different sides delighted him to the depths of his soul. He smiled and thanked the young man, saying that it was a wonderful phrase. He believed that this, it seems, was the original idea of this song. He told about what they say. Their founder created a lot of texts and songs in his time, each of which was a classic passed down from generation to generation. However, they were lost at the end of the previous era and therefore only 2 songs remained. Qingchen immediately asked about the name of the second one. Li Shuten reported that the second song was called Canon. Then he said that only the name of the second song is known, since the predecessors carefully tried to search the ruins. However, they still could not find a single note. Qingchen, with dark bruises under his eyes, gritted his teeth and thought. It looked like their founder was really a hitman. If he crossed worlds, then the canon that Li Shuten was talking about must be the same canon in D major by Pachelbel. Judging by Li Shuten's respectful attitude towards the founder, the guy was thinking whether it was worth giving the man a canon in exchange for his unusual path. The young man decided to wait, as this question would be worth thinking about better. After some time, sitting at a metal table, Qingchen, leaning on his hand with his head, told one of the prisoners that there was no need to be so wary of him. The prisoner froze. It was the same Lu Guanyi. Qingchen reported that Lai Shutong already knew about their relationship. Besides, he didn't even seem to mind at all about it. Then the guy said in a calm voice that, besides all this, he would like to rest now, so Xiao Lu should take a walk first and not disturb Qingchen. However, Lu Guanyi came up to the guy with lightning speed and, with the brightest and widest smile, sighed, telling the boy that he just wanted to disturb him for a couple of words. Calling the dark-haired boy boss, Xiao Lu said that he had been thinking for half a day about what he should call the guy. But, in the end, he decided that boss is very easy and pleasant to pronounce. The bionic guy kept babbling about how Qingchen had probably already heard King Yan mention him. He said that he had suffered since childhood. His own father sold his kidneys to wealthy people, replacing the guy's kidneys with a couple of bionic ones. Chen would probably say that his parents didn't love him that much, but if you judge it like that, who else loved him? He smiled with all 32 teeth and said that later he heard King Yan say that this time King Chen had called him here to explore the path, saying that Chen liked Lu Guanyi's abilities, and he was incredibly happy about it. The guy tried to convince King Chen that he shouldn't worry. He definitely promised Lu Guanyi that he would go through fire and water for King Chen this time, even if he had to die. However, he said that before his death he had regrets. A drop of sweat was running down the guy's face. He told the guy that he did not go to school and, therefore, he envied all these literate people from childhood. Qingchen, horrified by such a huge flow of information, sighed and asked what the guy named Lu Guanyi was driving at. The one with the eyes burning like stars asked Chen to teach him how to play Xianqi. An excited Qingchen asked the bionic guy why he wanted it so much. He chuckled and said that he would like to learn, because it's cool. He imagined himself playing Xianqi and the crowd roaring with delight around him. Raising his hand up, Xiao Lu called his boss and said that even wise people like Lai Shutong could not compare with King Chen. Isn't that cool? The already tired King Chen sighed heavily and asked the guy if it was really possible to earn a reputation by playing a couple of games in Xianqi. He replied approvingly and said that it was impossible to defeat Lai Shutong in a fight, but winning in Xianqi was one of the best options. He said that it did not even occur to him that Boss Chen, when he got into the 18th prison, would not only immediately get to know Lai Shutong, but would also be able to get along well with him. After all, given the status of the man in this prison at number 18, he might know where the Eastern Tibet they are looking for is. In addition, the guy said that if King Chen can get his inheritance, then the struggle for the position of Shadow will immediately stop. Listening to all this, King Chen pondered. It seems that Lai Shutong's fighting power was very high. From the very beginning, Chen arrived at the prison with the aim of finding something. Coming out of his thoughts, King Chen agreed to teach Lu Guanyi to play Xianqi, but immediately set the condition that the guy would leave him far and for a long time right now. He smiled and agreed to do it. The countdown on King Chen's forearm was only 5 minutes remaining. King Chen scrawled the inscription was here on the metal with a sharp object. The guy sat quietly and pinched his hand, thinking that these 2 days were like a dream. Chen managed to meet several people during these 2 days and get to know another world. A serious purple bruise with bruises, more like a hematoma, formed on his arm. The young man did not know if he could still return here. 10 seconds remained. 9, 8, 7. King Chen sat on the bed, waiting for what would happen next. 6, 5, 4, 3. The guy sighed heavily and closed his eyes. 2, 1. Another world began to break into many fragments, which reflected the moments of the past 2 days in prison at number 18. Communication with Li Shutong. Xianqi game. The cunning look of the prisoners on the first day. Lin Xiao's dirty tricks. Chen's thoughts about it all. The hope that he will be able to return here. Everything was broken into pieces. King Chen was falling into a dark, incomprehensible void again. The other world crumbled into many pieces. King Chen was back in his room. The room and himself were dark, having a blue outline. Once back at home, King Chen was sitting on the bed as he had 2 days ago. He was also dressed, with a backpack on his shoulders and a knife in his hands. The countdown on his forearm was 47 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. King Chen picked up his phone. Turning on the lock screen on his smartphone, he realized that he had moved on the same day as he was then, when moving. 2 whole days have passed in that world, but only a second on Earth. The guy was very surprised. He wondered if when he returned to the other world, only a second would pass there, too, or not. He decided that this must have been the rule of all world travelers. He also decided that this was a good thing, since he would not have to explain why he would go missing so often. Qingchen rolled up the sleeve of his jacket and noticed the hematoma he had left the day before. On the other hand, he looked at the time of 47 hours, 59 minutes and 45 seconds. The phone rang. The young man immediately picked up the phone and said hello. The phone said it was a call from the Wangcheng Street Police Station. It was further reported that Qingchen's father was detained for organizing and participating in gambling, and then asked the guy to go to the police station. He immediately asked why he needed to go there. He was informed that on the basis of the law on penalties for violation of public order, Qingchen's father had to be detained, and also the man had to pay a fine. Then the policeman asked the guy to come to observe the formalities. He closed his eyes and apologized, saying that he would not come. Chen then asked the policeman to punish his father for this act with all severity. Then the guy quoted that, according to the law on penalties for violation of public order, aggravating circumstances were added from 10 to 15 more days on top of the term. In addition, a fine of 500 to 3,000 yuan was imposed. Qingchen asked the policeman to give his father the highest punishment. Then he thanked me and said that he was the one who reported the incident. He also said that he was not his son, but a caring citizen. The guy dropped the call, leaving the bewildered policeman alone with his thoughts. The dark-haired young man carefully put the knife on the table and fell on the bed, sighing heavily. Then the guy looked at his phone and sadly looked down, not seeing a single message from his mother. The boy decided for himself that it would be great if he could return to that world earlier. In the morning, the guy was walking somewhere in his school uniform. He thought to himself about what he had already done. He wrote down the notes of the canon, but he thought that if he gave them to Lai Shuten, he would have to explain where they came from, and this was very risky. Therefore, before giving him the notes, Chen had to find out if Lai Shuten had such value. After seeing the inscription second grade 3 group, the guy went into the office and saw a red-haired guy named Qingchen, who was excited about something. The young man asked him if the teacher who saw Chen running away from class yesterday had said anything. He asked him again. The calm Qingchen examined the guy and said that he was fine, but why was Qingchen worried? He reported that this was not the case. Chen paused and quickly flipped through the pages of the textbook, looking for the right one. After a while, he and Qingchen were sitting at their desks. Qingchen was reading a textbook, and Ginger was sitting with his head down. Then Qingchen called the guy and asked him what he would do if he encountered something particularly strange. Chen froze and began to calmly question Ginger. Strange? What is he talking about? He sighed and said he didn't know what it was, but it was something special. Qingchen raised his eyebrows and suggested calling the police. He immediately smiled and immediately began to inundate the guy with questions about whether he had friends from the police, to which Qingchen calmly replied, saying that he now has them, since his father was arrested yesterday for organizing gambling. Then Qingchen stared at his classmate in horror. He imagined Qingchen's father sneezing at a policeman in the interrogation room, while the other tried to hide behind a folder with papers. Qingchen buried his face in the book again, thinking about the strangeness mentioned by Qingchen. He suggested that maybe it was also a countdown timer on his hand. However, this countdown was clearly not visible to others. Suddenly, someone exclaimed loudly, drawing the attention of the rest of the classmates to look at popular queries on the internet. The guys perked up and listened attentively to their classmate. He said that the American basketball superstar Jacob launched a press conference where he told that he had visited the world of mechanical civilization. Qingchen froze. Who would have thought that there were also people abroad who experienced the countdown and the movement between worlds? A man with a mechanical arm threw a ball from his shoulder and it hit the ring with lightning speed. Jacob's press conference was being filmed. Qingchen, looking at this video, commented that the man remained as relaxed even after 10 hits out of 10 directly into the ring. He didn't know if it was special effects or not. Isn't this an advertisement with an excellent result? On the broadcast, basketball superstar Jacob reported that last night he accidentally discovered a countdown on his hand. And when it was over, Jacob really went to the strange world of mechanical civilization. He also said that there was also the moon, the sun and the earth, but, as it seemed to him, it was a parallel universe. In his opinion, the process of civilization in that world was very different from our world. Then he raised his mechanical arm up and said that he got it after traveling to another world. He believed that, it seems, there a man replaced some person and became a new himself. Jacob admitted that he did not know what the principle of the hand was, but its strength far exceeded his imagination. Besides, it was also very flexible and precise. The cameras clicked loudly, photographing the superstar. He said that now he can hit the ring from a huge distance at least 10, even 100 times in a row, and, with all this, never miss. Then Jacob said that he had not arranged this press conference to show off. In his opinion, that world is not at all as beautiful as it seemed. On the contrary, this other world was extremely dangerous. The man, full of seriousness, looked into the camera and said that he was holding a new press conference here so that he would not be secretly captured for research. He raised his mechanical arm up, exposing an open palm near his face. Then he said that he hereby declares that he refuses to be the subject of research. Then he asked that if he went missing one day, then Qingchen didn't listen much further. He was thinking that Jacob was a public figure, so he couldn't hide the fact that he had mechanical limbs. The man clearly understood that the technologies of the other world were much superior to those from Earth. So in order to avoid trials and not become a test rat, basketball superstar Jacob chose a more radical method. Qingchen thought that this was hardly an easy way, but it could be compared to the opposite side. I hesitated, so I made this decision in a hurry. Also, Qingchen didn't know where Jacob appeared when moving. Maybe on the other side of the ocean. Qingchen couldn't move either the knife or the toothbrush. He realized that, it turns out, the only way to bring things into this world from there is only by transforming himself or hiding in the body. The internet was exploding with news about the mechanical world. The first headline was that the head of an internet company about software production was found dead at home. A mechanical prosthesis similar to the one Jacob had was found on his body. The second headline was the news that a college student claimed to have also visited a parallel world. However, the world not only had a mechanical component, but also people with mind-blowing abilities. The third news was that a high school student began to possess the power of an awakener from another world. Qingchen stared intently at Nanjenchen's phone screen. He was reading aloud about a supernatural mechanical civilization. He wondered if traveling through the worlds really gave him the opportunity to surpass ordinary people. A classmate of these guys began to loudly suggest that it seemed to him that there were not a few travelers across the worlds. Could it be that one of them is studying at the same school with them? A classmate suggested that maybe someone would come to school with mechanical limbs. Another classmate shouted that he, too, would like to get into this other world of mechanical civilization. Qingchen calmly looked at Ginger and asked if this was what the guy had said earlier. The latter bowed his head and said that he could not tell him about it yet, but in any case, Chen should not have worried about it. Then he smiled and whispered loudly to the dark-haired young man that if Qingchen had fallen into such a stalemate, he definitely would not have forgotten about his bro, Qingchen. He smiled slightly and told Nanjencchen not to forget about his friend when he got rich. At this time, Chen was thinking that Ginger had just been terribly worried, and now he began to think about what would become the main hero of the world. He sighed, looking at the red-haired guy looking admiringly at the phone, and silently wished the guy that he was just happy. At school during recess, Nanjencchen enthusiastically told Qingchen what he meant, that he was wondering if Ginger would move there, whether he would be able to bring some high-tech products and sell them. To which Qingchen said that he did not know, but most likely would not be able to sell them. He was smiling, telling the young man that they both saw people who brought mechanical prostheses or something like that. Ginger convinced his friend that when he got rich, he would definitely treat Chen to a chic dinner. However, Qingchen sighed and said that many travelers had encountered many dangers in that world, so Genshin should be more careful. He believed that it was not worth thinking all the time about how to get rich. Nanjencchen pondered, slightly saddened. Then he cheered up again and asked Chen, when the time came, where they would go to eat. He said nothing, looking at the guys strangely. One of the boys' classmates was talking to others, thinking about what, after all, the law of the intersection of worlds is. He did not understand how it happened that so many people had already crossed the border, but for some reason they were the ones who still could not do it. The guy was clearly outraged. Hearing this, Ginger thoughtfully suggested that perhaps only truly talented people can cross the border of worlds. These words slightly excited Qingchen. After a while, a dark-haired young man was poking at his phone, trying to watch a video of some guy with a mechanical arm from another world. He was thinking that now it was possible to summarize some points. Firstly, for all travelers, the countdown before crossing this world was 6 hours, and the countdown before returning was 48 hours. In other words, the time is the same for all travelers. In addition, there were people who, after seeing the topic about travelers, declared that they had not crossed the world, however, found a 48-hour countdown on their hand. In the video, a guy with glasses was showing his mechanical arm live. But, after a few seconds, his cat began to play with him, who broke his mechanical arm, thereby making a hype liar out of the guy, who immediately tried to turn off the live broadcasts. Qingchen guessed that this must be the second group. Secondly, all the travelers were young people, aged from 10 to 35 years. Qingchen giggled while watching that video with the traveler and the cat. Now, apparently, it was possible to become popular by posing as a traveler between worlds. He addressed the guy in the video, telling him that his plastic arm was so bad that it would be impossible to confuse it with a mechanical one. Qingchen concluded that his friend Nan Qingchen wasn't in that second group at midnight yesterday. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so shocked because of basketball superstar Jacob's press conference. There was another video where it was said that another world traveler was found on the streets of Los Angeles, who was trying to hide. Qingchen made another conclusion that there were now two options. One was that the number of travelers is fixed, and only if someone dies, new ones will enter. The other option was different.
The number of travelers was constantly growing, and then, of course, there will be even more.
Seeing how in Los Angeles, the bionic traveler was rapidly running away from the paparazzi, delighted Nan Qingchen. Qingchen said that it would be great if there was such a world traveler in their school so that the guys could ask him about that world. Chen thought again. School, world travelers, the son of the chairman of the corporation Huang Jixian. It dawned on the guy. This son of the chairman studied in the 7th group of the 1st grade of high school. In the corridor, everyone was animatedly discussing these world travelers. Someone really wanted to get into this other world, and someone admired Jacob. Qingchen walked by, listening to the conversations only about this. He didn't know what time it started, but he felt that he was clearly different from other people. He had to be one of them, study hard and get into a good university. But now it seemed to Qingchen that his path was no longer here. Qingchen began asking other students at the school about whether Huang Jixian was in class today. The girl informed him that she had not seen this guy today. Chen smiled sweetly and asked if she knew where he lived. He said that by pure chance he borrowed something from Jixian and would like to return it to him. She pressed her glasses tightly to the bridge of her nose and said that the guy lived in the central garden of Qingchen. But the girl did not know where exactly. He thanked the girl and thought that Huang Jixian might not be able to come, since his psyche was probably traumatized. Chen thought that the guy might have gone completely crazy. Everyone was sitting in class and listening to a new topic on geometry. Teacher Tian Heilong, a middle-aged man, held a long ruler in his hands and tried to explain the topic. Realizing that he was not really being listened to, he said that he seemed to need to get a robotic arm or something similar so that students could listen to his lectures with a calm soul. After a while, he finished the lesson. Nan Qingchen handed his blue smartphone to Qingchen and said that a certain Hizai Xiao had laid out a strategy. Hearing this name, Qingchen asked Ginger again. He reported that this Hizai Xiao was a master in games. He could even be considered a high-level player. Qingchen said that he had released a video about the strategy of the game a few hours ago, but no one had ever heard of such a thing before. Ginger also said that this Xiao is still engaged in this strategy. Now that there was a lot of discussion, everyone suddenly realized something. The strategy of the game that Xiao gave could possibly be related to that world. The guy began to speak more quietly, informing Chen that the guy had become one of the travelers. On the phone screen, instead of a video recording, it was written that since this game was quite unusual, Xiao could no longer show the audience a video of it. However, the audio recording remained. Xiao called the world in which they are now external, and the world of this game, respectively, internal. Regarding this game, he said that he had entered it quite recently, so the information was very limited. Xiao reported that at the moment, no way had been discovered to obtain the hidden orange martial arts. He also said that currently only 3 ways of development are known. The first way was to use technology to transform yourself, which could be purchased at the hospital. The price of mechanical limbs was very high, and He has not yet found any bug with a lot of money, so he cannot try this path of development yet. He also said that selling organs here was the easiest way to get money, but the guy did not recommend using this method. The second way of development was to join the Forbidden Inquisition and become a new person after the injection. However, Xiao still hasn't found any non-player characters associated with this organization. He assumed that it must have been private. The third path of development was in prison at number 18. After entering there, players had to look for a non-player character named Li Shuten. The guy said that at the moment, this career path was with the highest known potential. Qingchen excitedly looked up from the screen. Beads of sweat were running down his face. He thought about the words of that game master Xiao. Is another world a game? Was Shutton a non-player character through whom it was possible to move up the career ladder? The guy suggested that when he returned, perhaps because of this video, the people who ended up in prison at number 18 would run to Lee Shutton for career advancement. Lee Shuttong's reputation in the inner world was really high. Even Hsiao Xiao had only been there for 48 hours and had only heard of him. Ginger, meanwhile, was sighing in frustration. To buy mechanical limbs, money was needed, and the Forbidden Inquisition could not be found. It would be possible to find the 18th prison, but how to get there was also unknown. The theme of crossing worlds has been very popular in the classroom for a long time, until the news suddenly appeared in the afternoon. She was like a dark cloud that covered everyone's enthusiasm. The young man who was identified as a world traveler was found dead at home. In the video, it was shown that the mechanical prosthetic legs that he was wearing suddenly disappeared. Many travelers who impulsively revealed their identities due to the popularity of the topic began to be afraid. Some of the people who returned with mechanical limbs were also afraid of being killed. The media got the news, and some people started speculating. Perhaps by killing a world traveler, it was possible to replace him and get into another world. Seeing the terrible news, Qingchen was excited. Cold sweat was running down his face. Qingchen asked his friend with a serious face if he had seen the news. He said he meant that if Ginger also suddenly crosses worlds, then he needs to be more careful. And when you come back, you shouldn't talk nonsense. Qingchen lowered his head and said in a trembling voice that it was finally possible to change his fate. But in the end, everything suddenly turned into a horror movie. He asked a dark-haired friend what he thought they were doing all this for, to which Qingchen calmly replied that at the time when other people's fathers sacrificed their lives, his was playing cards. Qingchen chuckled and asked about Chen's father. The one, straight as a rail, said that his father sacrificed his life playing cards. He said how he cut it off. From such a statement, Ginger was petrified and could not say a word. Calming down a little, he asked Qingchen how his father was arrested. He calmly said that he had denounced him himself and hoped that his father would be able to think about everything there. Ginger opened his mouth in shock. Then his eyes lit up with a bright light. Qingchen smiled and asked his friend if he could inform on his father as well. Qingchen blinked in surprise, looking at Qingchen. The bell rang throughout the school. The teacher started his lesson. Someone was listening attentively, someone was drawing in textbooks, some of the children were sleeping at all. Qingchen was bored listening to the topic, and Qingchen, at the same time, was carefully climbing into the phone. The girl who found out that she became a migrant was interviewed. Yellow autumn leaves with inscriptions fell on the guy's head. Chen squinted, trying to gather his thoughts together. There was too much new information. It was as if he was sitting on a chair not in class, but under a tree from which dry leaves were constantly falling. The young man put out his palms, catching these leaves. He thought that the travelers found today seemed to be distributed among the points that were concentrated in 19 cities. In addition, the distribution of travelers could be very concentrated. The young man stared sternly at the leaves, pondering this. Then he clenched them into a fist, turning them into dust. At 20 minutes to 5, recess began at Qingchen's school. After leaving the classroom, he immediately ran down the corridor somewhere. Qingchen, holding a mop in his hands, lamented that this child had skipped class again. Jumping off the school parapet, the guy ran home very quickly. At home, he immediately changed into a hoodie and jeans. Putting on a black cap, he picked up the phone and left the house. In the phone, the guy opened online maps to plot a route to the central Qingchen garden. The young man wanted to see what happened to Huang Jixian's inner world after returning from prison number 18. Although Qingchen didn't know where exactly he lived. Along the way, the guy realized that nothing would work without hardening. To survive in such a dangerous world, it was necessary to have a strong body and a strong spirit. The boy sighed and decided to run to get to the right place in the city as soon as possible. Something has obviously changed. The shackles that Qingchen's family and entourage had placed on him began to slowly fall off. The guy was running fast across the bridge. Snatches of his gambling father surfaced in his memory, who could raise his hand to women and hang out in all sorts of different clubs. His sad mother, who decided to leave for a new family. Gradually, these shackles collapsed, giving the guy, finally, to breathe deeply. When it was almost dark, the dark-haired young man finally reached Qingchen Central Park. It was a large residential complex with beautiful multi-story buildings. When Qingchen came to the gate, he saw that he couldn't just walk in. A concierge sat at the gate and checked that people passed strictly according to their cards. The guy was thinking that this Qingchen Central Park was worthy of the title of an elite residential complex, and in order to enter and exit, it was necessary to attach a map. He wondered if he needed a card to enter through the back door. Cautiously, the young man approached the second gate. Several people were standing near them. Qingchen came closer and was very surprised. He heard terrible mutterings about prison and mechanisms. Two men were leading a dark-haired guy with bruises under his eyes by the shoulders. He was hanging onto men in suits, screaming something about monsters and horror. This guy was the same Huang Jixian. He was pushed into the back seat of the car and the door was closed. Qingchen, at this time, was hiding behind a tree and watching what was happening. Through the tinted glass, the boy noticed the outline of one of the men, who was looking directly at Chen, devouring him with a stern look. Qingchen pretended to look at the phone. The man continued to look at the boy. He continued to pretend to look at the phone until those creepy men left with Huang Jixian. A drop of sweat was running down the guy's face, and he was all screwed up with fear. The boy was tormented by many questions. What kind of people were they? Why did they take Huang Jixian? Was he taken away because he was a world traveler? The guy realized that this was all happening, in no way a coincidence. The guy was walking along a busy street. Other passers-by behaved differently. Someone was walking calmly, and someone was drinking and fooling around. And someone was following Qingchen. Realizing this, the guy turned cold, but did not show it. He was analyzing the fact that ever since Chen turned around and went home, this man had been following him for 5 blocks already. The guy understood that this man had been vigilant from the very beginning. The guy began to walk a little slower, gradually taking his phone out of his pocket. Then he almost stopped and said on the phone that he would be back a little late. The man following him, without stopping, calmly walked past the boy. After looking at him, the guy went in the other direction. After some time, Qingchen had to cross the road through a pedestrian crossing. The pedestrian traffic light was burning red. It also had a timer of 20 seconds. Chen was standing at the curb with his head slightly down. Turning his head slightly to the left, the young man noticed an already familiar man next to him. He had recently seen this man at the main entrance to an elite residential complex. It was clearly not a coincidence. It was cross-tracking. Qingchen took his brown eyes away from the man and looked into the distance. He was tormented by the question of what kind of organization it was, that it was so well trained and was so concerned about issues related to world travelers. Qingchen was clearly not the first batch of travelers. Most likely, his party was the second or even the third. Even if someone found out about the travelers today, they wouldn't be able to react quickly. The people who followed the boy were very well prepared. People waiting for a traffic light signal change just didn't wait. Someone was talking to someone on various topics, and someone was talking to a certain Xiao Lai on the phone. Someone was playing mobile games on the phone, and there was even a person selling candied fruits on a stick. The guy who was watching the boy didn't show it at all. He stood in wireless headphones and looked into the distance. Qingchen looked ahead, thinking that there was no way he could make a mistake. The traffic light turned green. People standing on the sidewalk started moving almost immediately. Qingchen remained in place for a few seconds. Here it is, right now. This was his chance. The guy turned around and walked in the other direction. The man in the headphones immediately informed his colleague that the object did not cross the road, but turned around. Then he asked the man if he was there. He said that he would be there only in a couple of minutes. The man turned around, thinking that he had to wait quite a bit. But he missed Qingchen. Then the second guy ran after him, telling the man over the earpiece that it was just a shame. The two of them were following one person and suddenly lost sight of him. He then asked him if he thought Qingchen understood that they were following him. The man on the earphone said that he was sure that the young man had discovered the surveillance, calling the boy a master. The man reported that Chen looked 17 or 18 years old, and perhaps was also a schoolboy. He believed that if the guy did discover their surveillance, then his abilities were extremely high. In addition, the dark-haired young man acted very naturally. When he first stopped to call, the man thought he was still unnoticed. Besides, back then, he was directly following him. The man from the pedestrian crossing sighed heavily. He said that he was curious why the second man suddenly decided to pursue Qingchen, because they had a lot of work today. He believed that there was no need to waste time on passers-by. He sternly said that it was not a sudden intention. He said that when the squad was taking out the object number 009, the man noticed that Qingchen avoided the captain's gaze. A dark-haired young man quickly ran into a building. Cold sweat was running down his face. He sat down on a bench, deciding to sit there for half an hour as he wanted to make sure there was no surveillance, and then only go home. The boy went to Xiao's channel and found that that streamer was offline. Chen suggested that maybe this streamer was also captured by this organization. He wondered how many such mysterious organizations existed in the country. After a while, Qingchen went outside. A car drove past him at high speed. Approaching the house, Chen saw a huge crowd of people. An elderly man with round glasses asked onlookers what was the matter. A dark-haired woman next to him informed the old man that, apparently, there lived a man who bullied his wife. A woman from this house has already been hospitalized once, but this did not stop the man. The adult woman also reported that the woman had already wanted to divorce this man, but he beat her again. He also said that if a woman filed for divorce, he would kill her entire family. The old man, after this story, asked what happened today. Did that man beat his wife again? He also noticed that something seemed to have happened to this man this time, to which the woman told the old man that he was right. This time the wife beat her husband. She said that the man had had too much alcohol, then returned home in the evening and wanted to beat his wife again. But as a result, it turned out that many people traveled between worlds, and his wife, as it seemed to that woman, was one of these travelers. The woman reported that at first this wife was beaten and she did not dare to resist, but before she lost consciousness, she broke her husband's arm with one blow. A man screaming in pain, at this time, was carried on a stretcher into an ambulance. The woman told the old man that she was sorry that the little girl and their family, their daughter, had to see all this. She thought that the girl was too young for this. A red-haired girl was sitting on the ground with her hands folded on her knees. Qingchen slowly walked over to her, examining her. The girl raised her head. Seeing Qingchen, she raised her eyes full of tears and called the guy, calling him brother. Qingchen hugged the little girl and hugged her. She carefully held on to him with trembling hands and cried. In 2 years, Qingchen didn't know exactly how many times he had seen these mother and daughter sitting downstairs, hugging and crying. This girl's name was Lai Tunyan. When her parents started quarreling, the little girl came to hide at Qingchen's house. The boy remembered the first time he cooked fried rice with soy sauce for her. As soon as this man saw his wife talking to others, he immediately beat her at home. But now he got what he deserved. The little girl called the guy again, calling him a brother. Through tears, she said that her mother told her to go and stay at Qingchen's house for a while. The baby knocked, but the young man was not at home, so the dark-haired guy first listened attentively to the girl. Then he smiled and interrupted the baby, asking her if she had eaten. Then he offered to cook fried rice for her if she hadn't eaten yet. He was smiling and stroking the little girl's head, but then abruptly froze. Suddenly, the guy came home with Lai Tunyan. He immediately locked the door and ran to curl the windows. The frightened Tunyan asked her brother about what had happened. He turned around with a smile and said that it was nothing special, but the girl needed to be quiet. On a busy street, police officers stood near their car and drew up a protocol. Qingchen slightly looked out of the window, looking at what was happening on the street. Someone was walking towards the police. 2 men in glasses and suits with a patch on the chest got out of the black car. Qingchen realized that these were the same people on SUVs that he had seen in Central Park. In his opinion, these people came here very quickly. One man raised his gaze directly towards the house where Qingchen's window was located. He had already, by that time, quickly closed the curtain. The man looked away and pressed his glasses to the bridge of his nose. The second man asked if something had happened. He said that nothing had happened and he was just looking around. He then reported that he had a feeling as if someone was looking at him. He decided that he must be too nervous and said it was time to get to work. Qingchen was hiding behind the curtain thoughtfully. He was thinking that if Lai Tongyan's mom was taken away, then the situation would clearly be difficult. The father was beaten and was in the hospital, and a mysterious organization took the mother away. The guy was thinking what he could do after that. But, no matter how you look at it, there was no way out. However, it was decided to improvise. After a while, Lai Tongyan looked at Qingchen in surprise. He came close to the front door and listened. There was no movement. After listening, the boy concluded that if someone had really been taken away, the sounds of resistance would have been heard. A few moments later, the men in suits returned to their cars and then left the place. The guy looked out of the window in surprise. He was tormented by a number of questions. What has changed at all? Did those men come back empty-handed? Don't they collect all the travelers? There was a knock on the door. Tunyan stood by the door in surprise. A drop of sweat was running down the young man's face. Then the guy still went to the door and opened it. In front of them stood a dark-haired woman with 2 bionic hands. Her whole face was covered in abrasions. She guiltily scratched her head with a mechanical prosthesis and apologized to the boy for having to bother him again. The dark-haired guy examined the woman and smiled slightly, telling her that it was okay. Besides, the boy was going to cook food for Lai Tongyan. He also assured the mother of this girl that the baby did not bother him at all. She thanked the boy wearily. Then the woman turned to her daughter, calling her Zio Yun, and said that it was time for them to go home. She asked the girl to be obedient and not cause even more problems. The little girl turned around, looking at the boy's apartment. She said that she was still hungry, and her mother had trashed the house and there was nothing to eat there. She once again called Xiao Yun by name. Qingchen then patted the little girl on her head and invited them all to eat together at his house. The woman looked at the guy thoughtfully. She was thinking that although this boy named Chen had helped before, he had never shown such initiative. She wondered what had happened today. The latter smiled and said that, besides all this, he was very interested in world travelers, which is why Chen wanted to ask. Then he held out his hand to the woman and asked her how to address her. She carefully went inside and took her daughter by the hand. After walking down the corridor, the woman reported that her name was Jiangsu. The guy went to the kitchen and asked the woman if it was convenient for her to talk about it, since he wanted to learn about the inner world. She hesitantly took her daughter's hand even tighter. Then she walked inside, smiling slightly. Jiangsu apologized for the trouble and said that there was nothing inconvenient in such a conversation. The boy could ask her about it at any time. He turned around and looked at Jiangsu with a little sadness. He wondered if such a weak person could survive in such a cruel inner world. After a while, there were a lot of various snacks on the table. Lai Tunyan happily flew into the dishes and still managed, with all this, to feed her mother. Jiangsu carefully controlled what Tongyan was doing. Qingchen watched them while eating dinner. Then he said that the police were here to deal with this case. Then he asked the woman what the police had told her. She raised her eyebrows with a little sadness and said that the neighbors helped Jiangsu explain the situation. She also said that initially they wanted to take her away, but these policemen took into account the fact that she has a daughter named Lai Tongyan. Besides, even if she had been taken away, she would still have been declared innocent. Qingchen then inquired about the fact that he had seen 2 more people in suits who came later. He was curious about what those people wanted from a woman. She said that she also did not understand why those people came to her. She said that they asked her to fill out some form, and then took 2 photos of her identity card and left. Qingchen was surprised. Is that really all? Lai Tunyan continued to chew food, tried to listen carefully to the conversations of adults, although she did not really understand what they were saying. Jiangsu reported that those people also said they could look for this woman later, so they showed her not to leave the city soon. However, they never said why they might look for her later. Also, she said that the woman did not see what documents these people in suits presented to the police, but they were immediately brought up to date. Qingchen scooped up some rice with his chopsticks and began to chew. He was thinking that it seemed like these people didn't catch all the travelers. In addition, those people also had official documents. It was clearly not as crazy as it seemed. The guy lowered the bowl of rice and leveled off. He turned to Aunt Zhang, asking her about her role in that inner world, because both of her hands were mechanical. She rubbed her forearm with her other hand and, looking down, said that there she had opened a mechanical hospital in the city at number 18. There, Jiangsu actually installed mechanical prostheses for other people. However, the woman didn't know anything when she got there. She said that once a man came to her to install a mechanical prosthesis, Jiangsu, and could only say that the prosthesis was not in the hospital. Then she told me that these mechanical hands appeared to her as soon as she got into another world. However, when Jiangsu came back, these prostheses did not disappear. Qingchen calmly reported that a traveler had told him about prison number 18. The guy was interested in where she was. Jiangsu immediately reported that this prison was located on the outskirts of the city at number 18. She also said that this prison was quite famous there. The woman suggested that it seemed to be a place intended for the detention of criminals. In addition, this prison was the highest level in the Federation. Qingchen opened his eyes wide and asked about the Federation. Turning to Aunt Jiangsu, he asked what else she knew. She sighed and said that she had been there for only 2 days and, therefore, did not find out anything. Lai Tongyan asked her mom what her hospital was called. She reported that the hospital was called Jiangsu Mechanical Hospital. Then she asked why her daughter needed this information. She closed her eyes and said she was just asking. A little later, Aunt Jiangsu asked Qingchen about why the guy was so interested in the affairs of travelers. He said that he, too, would like to look at another world. He also told the woman that he envied them, the travelers. She looked at the boy sadly, but at the same time, sternly. She said that this inner world was very dangerous for people, except for those who were related to the corporations of Lai, Chen, King, Kamishiro, and Kashima. The rest of the people were in a difficult situation every day, even worse than in the outside world. Qingchen said nothing. The woman took a napkin and said she would clean up. Chen, collecting dirty plates, asked the aunt cleaning the table what Own planned to do next. She froze and said that she would like to take Xiao Yun and live for a while at her grandmother's house in Zheng City. She also said that she decided to leave with her daughter tomorrow. Then she smiled and said she would come back to visit Xiao Yun. The dark-haired young man smiled slightly and said that a lot of people go to Jiang City every day, and it will be very difficult to buy tickets. He thought it was better to do it now. She agreed with the boy's words and tried to buy tickets online, but there was an error when making a ticket. The woman wondered why this was happening. Qingchen looked thoughtfully at the phone in his aunt's mechanical hand. Just as he thought, the warning was a warning, but in fact Jiangsu was banned from leaving the city. While Jiangsu was washing dishes, Qingchen was sweeping the floor and occasionally glanced at the woman. He was thinking that just recently, after unsuccessfully buying train tickets, Auntie Jiang tried again, but again failed. The guy thought that this mysterious organization must have had connections at the top. Qingchen didn't want to be confined to this city at all, so no matter what purpose those people pursued, the boy decided that it was better not to reveal that he, too, was a traveler. Qingchen sat down on the sofa to lie Tongyun, who, hugging a pillow, said as a fact that Brother Chen had never looked so directly at her mother before. Then she moved closer and whispered to the boy about whether he invited her mother, not because she was very beautiful. She also said that her mother is really very beautiful, so she was also a teacher of fine arts at the Bema school. He was embarrassed and told the little girl not to invent nonsense. A smiling woman approached the guys with things in her hands. She informed Qingchen that she had found a couple of dirty things, so she would take them to wash. Then she said that after the guy's parents separated, it was obviously not easy for him to live in this apartment alone. Then Auntie Jiang suggested to the boy in the future, if he had dirty clothes, that he should immediately carry them to Auntie and she would help and wash them. The guy tried to stop her, saying that he could do it himself too. Jiangsu, ignoring the guy's words, took Xiao Yun by the hand and said that it was time for them to go home, since Brother Chen probably still had to repeat his lessons. They went out into the corridor and closed the door behind them. Qingchen remained standing in the apartment, his mouth open in shock. In the evening, right in his clothes, Chen was lying on his bed, holding his mobile phone in his hand. He was thinking that his classmates were still discussing the events related to the travelers. In addition, even the incident with Jiangsu became a topic of conversation for the residents of Luo City. And Ziyak Sao still hasn't posted a video with new strategies related to the inner world. Chen looked at the burning screen of his smartphone. There was still no news from his mother. A few moments later, his mother called on the phone. The guy immediately answered the call. The woman turned to Xiao Chen, telling him that she had already sent the boy's father money for accommodation. He immediately replied that he had to pay for his textbooks this week. The woman did not comment on this in any way and said that her youngest son named Hea Hao suddenly had a fever, so his mother would not be able to come to the boy for the weekend. She then told Chen to go to bed early and try to keep up with his studies. He answered only okay and then hung up. The dark-haired young man stared sadly at the phone screen, biting his lip. She finally called. But, as it seemed to Tom, his mother no longer remembers that Chen skipped school. He threw the phone on the bed and lay down next to it. None of that mattered now. It was 7 in the morning and 20 minutes by the clock. The countdown to return to the inner world was 20 hours and 40 minutes. Qingchen ran somewhere early in the morning. On leaving the house, he noticed that Jiangsu, to the boy's surprise, had indeed washed all his clothes. The guy thought that Aunt Jiangsu was very hardworking. Then she looked out of the window, hanging out a white t-shirt. She smiled and told him that she had cooked rice porridge, inviting the boy to get up and eat. He smiled and waved his hand, telling Auntie that she shouldn't have done it. To himself, the guy thought about the fact that he had not seen anyone treat him so well for a long time. It was a little unusual for him. After a while, already in his school uniform, Qingchen opened a chocolate tube and took a bite of the crispy crusts. Already eating a bun, he was at the gate of the School of Foreign Languages. Other students ran and had fun in every possible way before classes. Suddenly, Qingchen grabbed someone's arm. It was a very excited Nanjianchen who was running past. Qingchen asked the guy what happened to him. Was he really going to buy high-tech nano-S sold by a group of scammers that Ginger joined yesterday? Or was he going to ask for a lot of money from rich ladies? He ignored the questions and asked Chen if he hadn't read the class group on WeChat. Then the red-haired young man reported that someone from a parallel class turned out to be a traveler. Besides, that person was in the office right now. Qingchen looked closely at Nanjianchen, stopping him. Then he asked how they found out about this incident, since there was no one with mechanical limbs in the parallel class yesterday. Ginger said that the guy was bragging himself. He endured the whole day. But in the end, last night, when talking to classmates, he could not restrain himself. Qingchen frowned and thought. He He was tormented by many questions. What kind of business is this? Why were there so many world travelers at the Luo Foreign Language School? There are more than 20,000 people in one institution, and only in this school it was already known about 4 travelers. Then how many of them are there in the country? Let's say that travelers were found in 19 cities, but then their total number was also quite a lot. The guy was afraid that others would find out about the rule according to which travelers are limited to several cities. Will people from all over the country flock to these 19 cities and hope that they will also become the 3rd, 4th, 5th batch of travelers? Perhaps it was not so now. But if a 3rd group of travelers appeared who confirmed this guess, then the assumption could well become a reality. Qingchen was afraid that in the future, this couple dozen cities, including Luo City, would become more and more lively. The excited guy was walking around the school, and the other students, looking at him, were whispering. The teachers were in front, followed by 2 guys. One was tall and serious, and next to him was an excited short guy who had obvious problems. Qingchen patted Nanjinshan on the shoulder and said that the one who was taken away by the head teacher and teachers must have been the same world traveler. He concluded that they were late and offered to go to class. In the classroom, Qingchen rested his head on his hand, thinking. He was thinking that those people from the secret organization might have come to the school. He also realized that the transition to another world would happen very soon, so there was no need for surprises. If these people from the secret organization could restrict the movement of Jiang Zuzan, then, as the guy was afraid, these people had the power to request access to CCTV cameras. Although, the area where Qingchen's house was located was relatively old, there weren't that many cameras in the area. But the young man decided that it was still not worth relaxing. Today, Qingchen decided not to leave the classroom anywhere except to go to the toilet. Suddenly, Nanjinshan called Qingchen, distracting him from his thoughts. He told the guy to quickly watch the new strategy that Xiao had just posted online. Qingchen opened the video in his phone and saw the inscription that Xiao, for some reason, could not post a new video yesterday. Today's strategy was an addition to the review of the inner world. This video was about the fight for the place of the shadow of the King Corporation. King Corporation was one of the 5 largest companies in the entire inner world. Shadow was a person of the King Corporation who had power in the shadow world. Xiao reported that it was said to be a tradition that the King clan had followed for over 1,000 years. From time to time, a new shadow was chosen and a struggle began between the outstanding sons. The choice of a new shadow greatly enlivened the whole inner world. Currently, there were 8 candidates known to take the place of the new shadow, each of whom had a unique talent. King Huai, King Wen, King Shi. Besides them, there was another person who was very mysterious, and Xiao still couldn't establish his identity. A strained drop of sweat trickled down King Chen's face. He was thinking that this must have been the reason why Chen appeared in prison number 18. He chuckled to himself, thinking that it was all like the addition of Yuri's revenge. The countdown to the return to the inner world was 6 hours, 19 minutes and 29 seconds. King Chen stood up from his desk and glanced at Nanjinshan. He turned blue all over and was trembling violently with excitement. Excitement was clearly written on Ginger's face. The young man lowered his gaze, thinking that if that fool Nanjinshan really got into prison number 18, then King Chen would be able to help him, even though he risked being discovered. Then he calmly turned to his friend, telling him that, let's say, if Genshin crosses the border of the worlds tonight, then he should be extremely careful. After all, Ginger himself saw with his own eyes what those people said on the internet. The inner world is not safe. Genshin stuttered and told his friend that he was not a traveler. Leaving the classroom, Chen turned around and told Genshin to just remember it. Privately, the dark-haired guy thought that the fact that Genshin could keep it all a secret until now showed that this guy had some ideas. Towards nightfall, Aunt Zhang came to King Chen's apartment. He asked what the woman wanted. She smiled uncertainly and said that the fact was that, after all, the young man knew that Jiangzu was a traveler and the countdown should end very soon. She excitedly said that the inner world was very dangerous and she was not sure that she would be able to return. She asked the boy that if she didn't come back tomorrow, would he be able to take care of Xiao Yun. The man's eyes bulged in shock. Then he asked the woman why she said that. He believed that she would definitely be able to return unharmed. She lowered her head. Sweat was pouring down her face due to her excitement. She told the guy that he didn't know how dangerous the inner world was to comfort his aunt like that, but she knew it very well. Then she said that without experience in the Big Five, human life in the inner world was worthless. She also told the boy that she wasn't asking him to look after Xiao Yun for long. Jiangzu then informed that Lai Tongyun's grandmother would arrive from Zheng City tomorrow. King Chen smiled, promising the woman to fulfill her request. However, the guy still hoped that Aunt Jiangzu would be fine. She exhaled with relief and thanked the boy. Then she handed over a metal key and said that she would leave this key to her house with the boy, so that if anything was needed, it would be convenient to open the door. Qingchen took the metal key and closed the front door. It could be said that it was trust in him. The countdown was 9 minutes and 59 seconds. Qingchen opened his mouth and put the flash drive in there. With 5 seconds left, he left another hematoma on his arm. 4, 3. The guy was sitting on the bed, getting ready to go to the inner world. 3, 2, 1, 0. Everything turned dark blue again and had only a bright blue outline. Then the outside world began to crack again, like broken glass in a mirror. Qingchen was going to the inner world again. Shards of worlds rained down on Qingchen's cell. But then, at the same moment, they melted like snowflakes. The guy was lying on the bed, putting his hand on his forehead and smiling. He was thinking that, to his great happiness, he was back in the 18th prism. Otherwise, the previous efforts and the received sympathy of Lai Shutton would have been in vain. It didn't matter what his position was. In He Xiao's strategy, it was said that he was a very important figure in this world. The guy abruptly exploded from his bed. Now it was possible to make sure that each transition was a continuation of the past. Qingchen smiled slyly. He decided that the learned notes of the canon would still be useful to him. Probably most travelers were still confused and didn't know how to get what they needed from the world here. However, Qingchen had already crossed Lai Shutong's entourage. They might have seen the magnificent and wonderful world outside, but none of that mattered. The guy pulled a USB flash drive out of his mouth, wet with saliva. After conducting this experiment, Chen realized that if you carry a thing in the body, then it could pass through this boundary between the worlds. Then the dark-haired youth rolled up the sleeve of his blue and white prison robe and looked at his bruise. The wound from the outside world has also been preserved. This proved that the boy's body was the one that had passed through the border. The guy decided that it was a pretty good experiment. Qingchen relied on his methods to gradually replenish his knowledge of the inner world and the mechanism of transition through all these worlds. The young man, at this time, was knocking on the cell door. He didn't know why, but compared to someone else's outside world, the guy even thought that he missed the noise a little, which he hadn't heard in the last 2 days. On the forearm of the dark-haired youth, a countdown of 41 hours, 55 minutes and 50 seconds was depicted with a bright light. The guy also concluded that the time limit was still kept within 2 days. He was interested in the question of, does the countdown duration change at all? Can it increase or decrease in the future? After leaving the cell, the guy heard lively chatter. An old man with a bionic eye prosthesis was slowly walking past a boy in the company of a red-haired guy with a bionic arm. Walking to the edge of the balcony, Qingchen saw a surprised Lai Shutong, and then a smiling Lin Xiaoxiao, who greeted the main character. Chen looked at them calmly, while the other prisoners, in shock and with intense envy, froze with their mouths open. Qingchen turned his head and waved his hand. They immediately parted, giving him a way to pass. The prisoners were chattering animatedly. One of them was glad that the young man waved to him. They thought the guy was actually smiling at them. Qingchen was thinking that a new group of people should have been escorted here yesterday at exactly 12 o'clock in the morning. The second group of travelers should have already entered the inner world. The guy was thinking about how he should find them. If these travelers really are there, how should Chen hide his identity? The young man looked closer and saw a group of prisoners again greeting the newcomer. Stop. The guy recognized a guy named Liu Deju from a parallel class. The dark-haired guy thought he couldn't go down yet, otherwise that guy would definitely recognize him. One of the prisoners was shouting loudly that the new ones had appeared and they would all have a good time very soon. Liu Deju turned cold with horror. This prisoner was Lu Guani, who was smiling as he greeted the newcomers in prison number 18. Qingchen, watching this, reflected that at first Lu Guani was troublesome. But when he returned, Chen realized that he had some warm feelings for this man. The young guy looked at Lu Guani in horror. The 18th prism. Liu Deju then asked the other prisoners if Lai Shutton was here. He wondered if the shaven-headed prisoner was familiar with Lai Shutong. He pointed down with his finger, pointing at Li Shutton. The guy was sweating from shock. It turns out that He Xiaoxiao really wasn't lying. After examining Lai Shutton carefully playing Xianqi, that guy's character of this man began to resemble the character of the boss. Lai Shutong, as usual, was sitting at the table in front of the Xianqi board. The cat was lying on the table nearby and was asleep. Yu Wang stood straight while Lin Xiaoxiao yawned. Hearing a loud crash, Xiaoxiao looked at the source of the noise in surprise. The same young guy was running from the crowd of prisoners, crying, with a tray of food in his hands. It didn't work out well. However, he realized that he would find Li Shutton very soon. Zayek Xiao appeared in front of him, who poked him in the forehead with his finger and stopped the guy. He fell to the floor with a tray in his hands, rubbing his forehead. Liu Deju was clearly in pain. Lin Zayek Xiao sternly looked at the guy. He started wailing about how these two newcomers were really weird, referring to this guy and Qingchen. Zayek Xiao genuinely didn't understand how these newcomers could come and look for his boss. The young man hugged Zayek Xiao's leg in fear, telling him that he was his own and had come to receive a mission. Deju then stood up and grabbed Zayek Xiao's collar tightly, shouting to him that he had come for a promotion mission. Lin Zayek Xiao looked at him in horror. What kind of jokes are these anyway? The blonde guy has never seen this person in the organization. And what kind of trouble was it that made everything look like a conspiracy? Then he slapped the guy's hands, forcing him to let go of his clothes. He shouted, demanding Zayek Xiao to let him pass. The prisoners, dripping with sweat, looked at what was happening with interest. Yes, Junior will do everything now. Then, this newcomer fell to his knees and began screaming at Lai Shutong that he was here to receive a promotion mission. Lai Shutong was silent and pretended not to notice anything. The prisoners began to exchange glances, but then the crowd of prisoners burst into loud laughter. What was that fool saying? Has he gone mad? Liu Deju's eyes began to fill with tears. Zayek Xiao turned around and sighed heavily. Then he waved his hand, thinking about what a weirdo this guy was. The prisoners approached this boy, deciding to hold a welcome party. This guy, while all this was happening, was thinking about what went wrong. He went straight to prison number 18. Wasn't this the beginning of the legendary path of the Chosen One? Zayek Xiao's strategy mentioned as many as 3 career paths. The first 2 were very vague, and only the way through this prison seemed the most feasible. Only, as it turned out, it wasn't the right place for a promotion mission. Liu Deju screamed heart-rendingly, asking to be released. Zayek Xiao glanced back. This guy escaped from the clutches of prisoners. One of them started shouting after the guy about how he dared to bite him at all. They began to catch up with the guy. He ran to the metal door with the number 4, knocking hard on it with his hands. He screamed and begged to be released from this prison, as he was very afraid that other prisoners would torture him. Those, at this time, began to approach him closer and closer. There was a giggle. Behind this loud guy was a robotic security guard who, for violating discipline, sent bright red lasers at the boy. He turned around, smiling nervously. His body instantly weakened from fear, and he fell to his knees on the floor, and then screamed again. Hearing a loud shout, Qingchen turned around and looked down from the balcony. He was thinking that this guy named Liu Deju was probably crazy. Having just arrived in a new world, shouldn't he have observed the situation first? At this time, a calm Zayek Xiao sat down at Lai Shutong's table. He turned to his boss, asking him if he didn't think things had gotten a little weird lately. The day before yesterday, a guy went crazy, saying something about the city of Luo, and behaved as if he was the heir of some corporation. In addition, this blockhead also came today to receive a promotion mission from boss Lai Shutong. The guy sincerely did not understand what kind of mission this weirdo was talking about. To which Li Shutong, holding a bowl in his hands, calmly said that he also considers this all happening really strange. Lin Zayek Xiao was secretly trying to pet the sleeping cat. When he almost touched his soft fur, he abruptly opened his bright blue-green eyes. Lin Zayek Xiao excitedly pulled his hand back and averted his frightened gaze from the cat, while looking for Qingchen with his eyes and asking others about it. The guy asked a lot of questions. Wasn't Qingchen quite active when he came down to dinner yesterday? Why wasn't this guy in sight today? At this time, other prisoners laughed to tears at this eccentric newcomer. It was very funny for them to watch this guy being taken away by robotic guards. Lu Guanyi smiled as he watched the scene. Suddenly, Qingchen appeared next to him. He, despite even the guy, told him that Xiao Lu, after the meal, let his people check all the newcomers and ask them about their identity and origin outside. He also said that he was well aware that the welcoming ceremony was their custom, but they should not start it so cruelly. He excitedly agreed to do as Qingchen said. As Chen left, he thought that he didn't know if there were any other travelers who were hiding. If they really existed, then they obviously wouldn't be able to invent the identity of the outside world. Those who could clearly explain their status were people of this inner world, and those who could not must have been travelers. Lu Guanyi immediately went to do the errand of his boss Qingchen. He dispersed the bewildered crowd, telling them to stop looking at Chen and go about their business. Qingchen thought about the fact that his friend named Nan Zhenchen, apparently, had not entered prison number 18. The dining room was very busy and noisy. Qingchen walked calmly with the tray. Lu Guani, passing by, whispered something in the guy's ear. He told Xiao Lu to go first. Chen thought that there must be no new travelers. After scraping the chair across the floor, Qingchen sat down opposite the imperturbable Lai Shudong. Then he calmly asked the white-haired man if he was really playing Xianqi again today. He calmly said that there was no more. He decided to leave Xianqi for a few days, as Lai Shudong still had something to think about carefully. Moreover, a guest was still coming to them. An uninvited guest. Qingchen, eating his food from a tray, reported that he had just seen a movement below. Then he asked what had happened. Lai Shudong calmly stroked his cat resting in his arms. Qingchen, without waiting for an answer, thought about the fact that the one whom Lai Shudong could call an uninvited guest was definitely not an ordinary person. The guy decided for himself that he definitely would not want to interfere in something that he would not be able to control well later. Therefore, the dark-haired young man decided that there was no obvious point in asking about it. After a couple of moments, Li Shudong, closing his eyes, said that he did not know. Qingchen, chewing, frowned in excitement. A drop of sweat trickled down his face. The intersection clearly caused Li Shudong great confusion. It is likely that the gray-haired man was faced with such a stalemate for the first time. Liu Deju, according to Qingchen, is a real fool who, after reading Heziak Xiao's manual, really treated Lai Shudong as a non-player character from a computer game. Under the sleeve of the prison robe, the countdown on Qingchen's arm was gradually decreasing. 37 hours and 2 seconds remained. There was a very loud sound of metal gates opening. The prisoners looked attentively at what was happening with undisguised interest. Qingchen also turned around in surprise. Walking slowly, there was a shaven-headed huge man with a bunch of tattoos. Seeing him, other prisoners opened their mouths in horror and some even screamed. Heavy metal shackles were on the legs of this creepy man, terrifying other prisoners. He was followed by several robotic guards escorting a shaven-headed man in tattoos. In addition, there were flying drones monitoring the movement of this prisoner. The hubbub and chatter instantly stopped with his arrival. The prisoners froze in horror and did not make a sound. Only the footsteps of this man, the robot guards, and the buzzing of drones could be heard. Qingchen contemplated the prisoner thoughtfully. For all the time he was in prison at number 18. This was the first time that the young man saw someone being escorted alone in the light of day. It was the first time the security forces at prison number 18 had been so involved. He closed his eyelids slightly. Qingchen used to think that Yuang was big and strong enough, but this prisoner turned out to be a little more interesting. The robots guarding that man stopped. He walked a few more steps and stopped. There was a deathly silence. Suddenly, this man grabbed the little prisoner by the jaw and lifted him up. He groaned in horror that even his eyes were red from the burst capillaries. The boy held his hands on the wrist of this shaven-headed prisoner, trembling violently with fear. This prisoner with a patch that had the number 70,512 on it calmly scratched his head and sighed. Then he examined the prisoners with a creepy look, asking them about the whereabouts of Lai Shudong. The almost blue-faced kid, grunting, pointed with his mechanical hand at a table in the distance of the hall, where Lai Shudong was sitting with Qingchen. The terrified prisoners immediately made way for this man to have a better view of this famous table. Lin Xiaoxiao and Yuang came forward in front of the table and stared sternly at the approaching bald man. The latter, throwing aside that little prisoner with bionic prosthetics of both hands, hurried, as far as the metal shackles on his legs allowed him, towards Lai Shudong's desk. The prisoners looked around in horror and fear. Qingchen looked closely at Lai Shudong. He stood up with a furry white cat in his hands and said that he did not expect at all that this uninvited guest would be such a straightforward person. He told the guy, who, although he decided not to ask questions, was still interested in what was happening, that this bald man in tattoos was called Guo Huchen. The white-haired man also added that Qingchen must have heard of him. Lai Shudong stepped forward, holding a white cat with one hand. He told the dark-haired youth to stay behind with Yuan for a while so as not to get hurt. Lin Xiaoxiao raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yuan glanced at Qingchen and thought that it seemed that he and Lin Xiaoxiao had underestimated how much Chen liked the boss, since Lai Shudong reminded him and Xiaoxiao about it. The bald man was approaching Lai Shudong faster and faster. Yuan glanced at him. Guo Huchen was here. The guy thought it was no wonder that boss Lai Shudong said that the llama would come from the south. Lu Guani looked thoughtfully at Guo Huchen and Lai Shudong. When his boss named Qingchen came, he didn't even look for clues, but just played Xianqi and read books with Lai Shudong every day as if nothing had happened. The guy believed that his boss King just wanted to wait for the moment when Guo Huchen would come and muddy the waters, and then Lu Guani and the rest of his henchmen will have to harvest. A clever move. Guo Huchen reached Lai Shudong and stopped. Then he held out his hand palm up and said they shouldn't beat around the bush. Guo Hucheng reported that he came here to pick up the forbidden Ace 5 item. He told Lai Shudong to tell him where this forbidden item was hidden. He promised the man that he would just pick him up and go home. Lai Shudong lightly patted the back of his cat, and he jumped off and walked towards Qingchen. He was standing behind Yu Wang and Lin Xiaoxiao. Lai Shudong smiled slightly, telling Guo Hucheng that he should be more polite to his elders and then he would not suffer. He began to shout loudly in his rough voice that if the gray-haired man gave the tattooed guy Ace 5, then he naturally promised to be more polite to Li Shuten than he is now. The gray-haired man asked this Guo Hucheng about why the Peaks were suddenly interested in forbidden objects. He believed that judging by Hucheng's tone, it seemed to him that Guo Hucheng had joined the Forbidden Inquisition. Guo Hucheng began to talk loudly about how he would like to fight with the big boys and, therefore, he could not refuse help. In addition, he said that they, the knights, have the same goal as them, so they should understand the situation of Guo Hucheng and his group. Lai Shuten smiled slightly and asked the man why he had come to prison number 18 for a forbidden object in the first place. Guo Hucheng took a couple more steps on the approach and told that there were rumors that the Chen Consortium had made a deal with Lai Shudong to grant absolute freedom in prison number 18 if he could restrain the consortium and suppress it. He also said about the forbidden subject, which he personally, the same Lai Shuten, restrained and suppressed, should be an extremely strong subject. The white-haired man closed his eyes and laughed softly. He told the shaven-headed Guo Hucheng with a bunch of tattoos on his body that the man was very wrong, since Lai Shuten, as he said, had no dealings with the Chen. The man also asked the bald guy not to believe these false and cunning rumors. Qingchen, looking at this whole situation, thought that in his Xiaoxiao's little guidebook, he had once heard about the Forbidden Inquisition, which apparently existed exclusively for forbidden items. The forbidden item with the Ace 5 number that Guo Hucheng was talking about should have been the very item that Qingchen came to find. He assumed that this was his assignment in the Battle of Shadows. Outraged by Lai Shutten's words, Guo Hucheng began to rush to Lai Shuten, asking him again about the location of Ace 5. Lai Shudong shook his head and told Guo Hucheng that he knew where that object was, but obviously wouldn't tell him anything. Guo Hucheng suddenly stamped his foot loudly and walked almost right up to Lai Shudong. Drones and security robots aimed bright red lasers at the shaven-headed man, issuing a warning to him. He went very close to Lai Shudong and asked about why the gray-haired man did not want to tell him about the location of the forbidden object. Lai Shudong grinned and sternly looked at Guo Hucheng, informing him that it was all just like that. Lai Shuten just really liked the forbidden Ace 5 item, which he did not want to give to Guo Hucheng. The alarm rang loudly, issuing warnings to the bald man. Guo Hucheng then straightened up. One of the prisoners shouted that Huyin had launched a metal storm. Crowds of prisoners began to slowly move back to escape from the metal storm. Someone else reported that in the past it would have taken half an hour of unrest for a metal storm to start, and it was only after the mechanical guards failed to control the disorderly riot of prisoners. Qingchen slowly began to step back. He examined the dining room and concluded that there were 72 metal storms, and as many as 36 of them were in motion. Guo Hucheng rushed and began to attack Lai Shudong. He stood still, not moving even when Hucheng's huge fist flew in his direction. Lai Shudong wasn't afraid of Guo Hucheng at all. The cameras, having recorded the dangerous movement of Hucheng, automatically turned on the metal storm. Screaming with fear and pain, the prisoners were in a hurry to run anywhere, just to escape from the terrible metal precipitation. Qingchen was analyzing the situation again. At this time, 36 metal storms were firing rubber bullets, solely for suppression purposes. However, the other 36 units were real lethal weapons. However, there were exceptions under this stormy rain of rubber bullets. Guo Hucheng hit Lai Shudong with his fist that even the dust rose up in a thick cloud. Yu Wang, at this time, sat down on the floor and lowered his hand there, using his magic power to deploy the dome. Guo Hucheng stopped in shock. Lai Shudong stopped the bald man's attack by blocking him with only 2 fingers. The white-haired man sternly looked at the surprised, even frightened huge man named Guo Hucheng. Large drops of sweat trickled down the face on which the tattoos were depicted. He opened his mouth in shock and couldn't say a word. The protective dome began to act. The metal storm immediately transformed. Lai Shudong, slightly knitting his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose, looked around while the frightened Guo Hucheng was breathing heavily in a cold sweat. The dome began to dissipate. Noticing a whole and unharmed Qingchen among the prisoners lying around, the gray-haired man opened his mouth in shock. 36 metal storms were supposed to hit Qingchen, How did it happen that the guy was sitting in the blind spot for all trajectories? Qingchen lowered his head slightly. He was sitting in the only shooting blind spot in the entire prison at number 18. Yuang was tense. Lin Xiao, shocked, looked indignantly at the boy. Lai Shudong chuckled softly, admiring this young lad's abilities. This Qingchen's temperament and abilities were clearly not possessed by his peers. The man wondered if this particular guy named Qingchen would be chosen by the King Corporation as the new shadow. When else will Li Shuten be able to find such a delightful receiver? Lai Shudong suddenly only hit Guo Huchin with one left. He flew back with an explosion, but was still able to slow down. He was breathing heavily and coughing, being shocked by Lai Shudong's abilities. Guo Huchin sat on the floor in thought, analyzing their fight. From the beginning to the end of the fight, he was only able to make his opponent's clothes waver several times. He was thinking that there were rumors that Lai Shuten was a demigod. Guo Huchin realized his and Lai Shudong's skills. The difference between the men was like an abyss.